I am so excited. You're listening to the James Altucher Show on YouTube. You're going to learn all about peak performance from today's greatest influencers and many of my heroes, and you're going to learn how you can get there as well. I upload a new video every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. So please don't forget to subscribe, click on the bell notification, and don't miss a thing.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Choose Yourself Network. Today on the James Altucher Show.
Motivation is like a state. It's like a mood of our mind and body. It's always in flux. It can go from 0 to 10. The reason I bring it up is because I find that I could get results with anybody as long as they have two qualities, that they are motivated and that they are teachable. In order to be able to change a habit, you need the motivation to want that, right? And I think there's certain things we could do psychologically to enhance our level of motivation.
Like what? Jim Kwik, super expert brain performance coach, instructor, teacher to the stars, teacher to top CEOs and entrepreneurs. Welcome to the podcast.
James Altucher, thanks for having me. Thank you for everyone who's tuning in, as always.
Yeah, no, this is your second time on the podcast. And I remember the first time you taught me how to have a better memory. I encourage people to listen to that older podcast because it was great. So thank you for that.
No, you're welcome. I think everybody who's listening, has memory issues. It's not a matter of good or bad memory. It's just having a trained memory or an untrained memory. But we're not taught, back in school.
Well, it's so interesting because on the one hand, I think school, unfortunately, is all about memorizing facts rather than really understanding deeper concepts that could be useful later in life. But on the other hand, I find a typical question people ask each other is, I just read this book and I don't really remember any of it.
Right.
The average person reading the average nonfiction book, what percentage of the book do you think they memorize?
Right. So I think, and it's always different.
Or remember, not memorize, but remember.
Right. I mean, part of it is just not reading faster. It's actually understanding what you read, right? And so I think there's two parts to reading, right? There's reading speed and then there's reading comprehension. And then if you have those and then work into your way to retention, it's important because there's no sense of everyone has the experience of reading a page in a book, get to the end and just forgetting what they just read.
Me.
Right? Yeah. And they go back and they reread it and then they still forget what they read. And so I think memory is important in that, yes, school is a lot about memorizing facts and figures and formulas and foreign languages and all that stuff. I think the things that are worth remembering the most, and I'll get to answer your question, is remembering things like loved ones. I think it's important to have good memory to remember those moments with the people we care about. Another one is life. Like I think if life is worth living, it's worth remembering. But a lot of people don't remember what they had for breakfast today, right? And so just remembering the things that are important to them in life. And then the last thing besides love and life is the lessons. I think a lot of people repeat the same mistakes. They always say insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result. But maybe it's not insanity. Maybe that's just a poor memory. Maybe a lot of people don't. They make the same mistakes over and over again because they forget the lessons in their life.
But let me ask you this. Like, let's take a common mistake that people might make. Like, let's say you go out, you date someone who's married, expecting them to leave their husband or wife and marry you,
right,
or have a lifelong relationship with you. That seems to be this stereotypical common. It's so cliched a mistake that it happens in every single soap opera and most movies.
Right.
And yet people make that mistake over and over again, expecting a different result. And clearly they know they've made a mistake, and all their friends say to them, "That's a mistake." Right. Why do they keep doing it?
It's interesting because, and that could be it could be in relationships, or it could be people's health. Right? They eat the same foods over and over again, and they get they wind into trouble there, or it could be hiring. It could be in business. A lot of people make the same mistakes. They invest in the same kind of companies, or they hire the same kind of people. And keep them and don't manage them correctly. So those mistakes could be ubiquitous. So I would say that some people in a relationship could repeat common problems. Part of it could be memory, because people don't feel, they could intellectually remember it, but they don't feel the emotional memory of it, the pain that came with it. Because I find that human beings, we're not just logical, we're biological. and we're very biochemical, right? And so you think about
if you think about it, that's all we are. We're basically a sack of skin holding chemicals.
It's a big chemical soup of dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins. I mean, it's just, even when people do make mistakes and they have breakups, I mean, it rewires your brain, right? Because the things that you obsess about, you get very connected to, right? When people get rejected and stuff like that, and it's rewiring to our brains because...
Well, and I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm a little bit of an interrupter. Is that okay?
Yeah, we know that.
Because when something comes to me, I'll be curious. Like, some of that might be on purpose as opposed to forgetful, in the sense that they get into a relationship. We're talking about relationships, but it happens in a lot of cases. They get into a negative relationship for all the obvious reasons. It ends, and the pain is so great, you need your cortisol level goes up, because we're talking about chemicals. And there's two ways to relieve the cortisol. One is to take responsibility and ownership yourself and say, okay, now I'm not going to do that again. And that's one way. Right. The other is to blame the other person and not yourself. And that also reduces the cortisol. So that's like a negative way of reducing the stress and the cortisol and the pain of the relationship. It's her fault or his fault. And so then your stress level automatically becomes reduced. And maybe you start memorizing that pathway towards solving that particular stress.
And that might not be the best empowering pathway for people to take each time, but it gives them temporary relief that you're talking about in terms of cortisol.
Yeah.
Like when we're stressed, we have cortisol and we have adrenaline, we go into fight or flight mode, which is, great if we need to be physical. It's not really good if we need to be analytical and study things and really understand things, because it shuts down different parts of our brain. But I do believe that the human brain is more of a deletion device than anything, right? You think about the billions of stimuli that's right here that we could pay attention to. We would go mad if we were, consciously aware of all that.
I think that's why, with books as a great example, one time I asked Stephen Dubner, who wrote Freakonomics, because I read lots of books to research for this podcast all the time. And often after I interview somebody, I'll remember everything right up until the moment after the podcast is done. And then it's almost as if this eraser has wiped out everything, because I put so much energy in it, burns out. But so I asked Stephen Dubner, who wrote Freakonomics, what percentage of a book do you typically remember afterwards? And he said typically 1 or 2%.
Yeah.
And which I thought was a very honest answer. I thought he would say 15%, but 1 or 2% I thought was a very honest answer.
And I could tell you one of the memory principles that we talk about in our courses is this thing called the Zeigarnik Effect. And
Zeigarnik Effect?
Zeigarnik.
How do you spell that?
It's up. I'll write it out for you. But here's the thing. So there's this psychologist in Europe, and her last name is Dr. Zeigarnik, right? And she noticed that when she was at these cafes, that the waiter or waitress would remember everyone's order until they would remember it completely until the actual order was delivered. And then after it was delivered, no recollection of what these people ate or drank, but it was full recollection. And the Zeigarnik Effect is basically this memory principle saying that the human mind doesn't like open loops. And if it starts something, it'll hang its attention on there until it's closed, and then it can move on. It's similar to what you're explaining with your personal experience, studying up, preparing for a guest, and then after you do, it's kind of like people back in school, right? Maybe a lot of them didn't study. They crammed the night before, and they crammed for 8 hours. They pulled an all-nighter, which is not good for your memory, obviously, because sleep is so important. But the next morning, people can't talk to you, right? You don't want anything to spill out at breakfast, and you can't wait to take the exam or the quiz, because once you're done, what happens? It's just gone, because there's a huge forgetting curve.
Yeah, and it's not even as if in the case of a podcast, it's not even as if I'm cramming for the guest, because every guest is on here because I really was fascinated by their books and wanted to talk to them and so on. But I'll remember everything then, even the acknowledgments, why did you acknowledge this person or say this about this person? And then afterwards, because I put so much time preparing questions and thinking about it and thinking about that person, maybe there is a natural number, find the 1 to 2% that's most important. It's like you just said, there's billions of stimuli around us right now. You kind of only want to remember or notice the 0.5% that's important.
Exactly, because I think knowing is half the battle, but I think the other half is just knowing the most important things. Even when we take notes, I just did a podcast episode on this, on like effective note taking. And it's been shown that actually taking notes, handwriting them instead of typing them is actually better for you.
I agree with that completely.
Yeah. It helps with their focus. It helps. One of the reasons why, besides the tactical feel of it, is because that nobody could write as fast as somebody talks. So whereas, somebody could type and transcribe something that, in terms of word for word, but when you're forced to handwrite and it's a slower process, it forces you to be mentally acute, to sort, to filter, to qualify information, to sort for what's most important to you also.
That's such a valuable technique because, handwriting versus the typing of ideas, or because every morning I'll take a pad with me and write down ideas as opposed to type my 10 ideas of the day or whatever. But when I first started writing, what I would do is I had my absolute favorite author who I loved and wanted to emulate, and I would just handwrite his story like word for word and think about, I could have just typed it, but it forced me more to think about, why did he use that selection of words? Why did he put the period there? Why did he break paragraphs there? It just forces you to try to do another layer of reasoning on top of what everyone's just sort of skimming through with their eyes.
They do that. They've done university studies where they have these students, they'll have a lecture where they're listening to it, and they'll have students half this class type it out and the other half handwrite it. And the people who actually took the time to handwrite them did better in terms of higher levels of understanding and higher levels of retention. And so the same thing. What about when it comes to reading books? Do you read off of digital devices or?
I do read off of, because about a year and a half ago, we both have to catch up on so much stuff. But about a year and a half ago, I threw out about 100% of my belongings, unless it fit in like one small bag. And so I only read on a Kindle.
So I imagine you talked about this in prior episodes. What was the impetus for what sparked you want to do that?
I want to be what I call, and I need a better word for this, so if you could help me come up with a better word. I wanted to be a choicist, meaning, let's say every day we make on average 10,000 choices. We probably make more. I'm just making up a number. 10,000 choices. I wanted as large a percentage as possible to be choices that I care about. So I only want my day to be about choices I care about. So I care about what I'm reading. I care about the people I spend time with. Like what you said, love, life, lessons. Those are the three things I care about.
So going through that process, what's a couple words that would describe how you feel now that you have like more after the process is done?
I feel it's made me, everybody likes to say, every day I wake up doing what I love. And that's sort of true, but you end up doing lots of things per day that you don't necessarily love. I would say it's brought me a lot closer to the truth of that statement. Every day I get to do what I love. And sometimes things are difficult. Sometimes things are incredibly difficult. No matter who you are, someone can get sick, you could get sick, something bad could happen financially, all sorts of things could happen. But every day I can say truthfully, I am getting closer and closer to doing what I love every moment.
So I filter everything through like the brain, right? And so mentally, do you feel more clear or have more energy because you're not, your mind's not going to other responsibilities?
Absolutely. I hate wasting brain power on decisions that I don't care at all about. I just don't go anywhere or do anything I don't want to do. And that sounds selfish, but you talk about I really relate to what you said before, how we could focus our memory and our learning around love, life, and lessons. So for instance, I will spend extra time with my children now, just doing things that we all love doing.
Right.
And I spend time with my friends because I value friendship even more now than I did before. And I think it's hard after a certain age to value friendship in certain ways like we did as kids.
Yeah.
So I feel now I'm able to better value friendship because I'm not wasting time doing all these other things. So suddenly, everything I do, opportunities become much more creative and interesting for me because I'm only doing things I love. And so I'm answering your questions more than you're answering mine.
No, it's all good.
The reason is because I'm super resonating with this love, life, lessons. And I think that's critically important.
Well, I think also we make decisions based on what we value the most, like what's most important to us in our life. And I think when we're talking about the human mind, when we're always deleting or we're distorting or we're generalizing, it's nice to know what's most important to us, and especially in our relationships, the people that we're talking to on a regular basis and communicating, the people we care about. I would say that knowing this, because you were talking about having too many choices, and we talked about in the last episode, we talked about 10 keys for unlocking your
good memory,
your superhero, your
That's
superhero
3 years
brain.
ago, our last podcast.
Right. And so one of them, we talked about like 1/3 of people's memory is predetermined by genetics and biology, but 2/3 is completely in our control. And we're talking about a good diet and getting rid of negative thoughts and exercising and brain supplements and positive peer group. But one of them was this thing called a clean environment, right? Just having getting rid of the clutter because it helps you focus. People know when they clean their office or they clean their desktop on their computer, they have a clarity of mind also. But you mentioned this word choice, that when you got rid of furniture and books and things like that, because you were concerned about all the decisions you had to make to be able to upkeep and hold everything together. And this is a real challenge. I think everyone who's listening to this, we all suffer from this thing called decision fatigue, right? This is the idea where research talks about saying we can only make a certain amount, a very limited amount of good decisions a day. And once we meet that quota, we're done.
I strongly believe that. So for instance, just as an example of what you just said, I specifically, in the mornings, I call them my maker hours. So that's when the things that I truly care about and want to be creative about, like let's say writing or podcasting or whatever I'm doing creatively at that moment, I do it in the morning. And then in the afternoons, as much as I possibly can, that's what I call my manager hours. Because most people don't have any maker hours. Like they're just managing from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. and then their business day's over and they go home and they're exhausted and whatever. So let's say from 2 to 5 p.m., that's my manager hours. I'll talk to colleagues, partners, people I work with, because the phone calls are easy and just following up on decisions is easy. And, most of that stuff is not creative. It's just like, okay, I got to move the needle on 6 different projects. That requires a phone call. Did you do this? Did you do that? Should I do this? Should I do that? The maker hours is when I'm writing, is when I'm brainstorming and coming up with ideas, just thinking of everything that I love doing.
And that's prime time, right? If you could win that first hour, then you could build positive momentum throughout the entire day, which is great because most people, I just did a podcast episode on how I spend the first hour of my day to jumpstart my brain. But one of the worst things people could do in the morning, which most people do, is they check their phone. And I still think when I'm working with elite mental performers, one of the things that people should not do if they want to really win that day is to check their phone. Because think about when you talk about the maker hours, when you're most creative, when you're most suggestible, touching your phone first thing in the morning, you're in this alpha, theta brainwave state where information is just going in unfiltered with our conscious mind.
What do you mean by alpha, theta state?
So we go through our brain cycles, different parts of our brain through different brainwave states. So right now, you and I are in beta state. That's where we're most awake and we're alert and conscious. On the bottom of that is delta. Delta is a state we're in when we sleep. And so basically you're measuring the frequency of our brain, and when it slows down, it goes to delta where we sleep. In between that, below beta, the waking state, is something called alpha, which is a relaxed state of awareness. That's the state we go into when we meditate. That's the state we go into when we watch television. And it's this relaxed state of awareness where information just goes in, mostly unfiltered. It's like if you see somebody watching TV and they're watching their favorite show or a sports event or whatever, and you try talking to them, but they're in a trance and they don't hear you because they're in that alpha state. And
oh my gosh, Jim, there's so many things I want to unpack on everything you just said. I just want to remind everybody listening, what I really want to do with Jim is figure out how he got to have such a dream job. We're hold on one second, Jim, because I want to get back to your clean environment. I want to get back to what you just said about the alpha state. There's a couple of things that you just said that I want to get back to, but I just want to remind people a little bit of who some of your clients have been in the past or the present, or maybe the future that you could talk about. You really are, people pay you a lot of money to give them this sort of advice and then some. So who have been some of your clients?
If people look at my Instagram, I work with a high percentage of the people that people see me on Instagram and such. But I've done programs for Elon at SpaceX for his rockets.
Elon Musk.
Sure. a lot of actors like Forrest Whitaker and Jim Carrey, Will Smith. I'll help them speed read their scripts, help them be focused and present on set, help them to memorize their lines in a fraction of the time, because there's obviously a lot of scripts and they have to stick it word to word, which is important. But high performers, at our events, we've had some amazing luminaries in the audience. Everyone from Quincy Jones to Matt Mullenweg, who founded.
Matt's a great guy. He's been on the podcast. WordPress creator.
Sure. So
I've seen pictures of you with Richard Branson.
Yeah, I've had the opportunity to do a number of things with Virgin, and but just my goal is those are great names. It's my passion doesn't matter. It's just because I grew up with this brain injury, and I grew up with learning challenge. A teacher at the age of 9, said that I was the boy with the broken brain. I had that label.
They actually said that to you?
Not to me. It was actually because
you had an injury. You had a bike injury or something?
I had a very bad injury when I was 5 years old, and I had learning disabilities. It took me an extra few years to learn how to read. I couldn't understand. I would have this imposter syndrome at this early age where I would pretend I would understand, but I really didn't understand a lot. And so that was a big challenge growing up. But my thing is, I don't want people to suffer the way I suffered. And my whole thing is just, 1 billion brains. I want them, no brain left behind. That's why I launched the podcast, because I feel like our most valuable asset nowadays, it's like none of us are paid for our muscle power, right? We're paid for our mind power. It's not our brute strength.
So true.
It's our brain strength, right? In this knowledge economy, and knowledge is not only power, it's profit. And I don't just mean financial profit.
No, I agree with you. I actually, I think it was the first chapter, one of my books, my book, The Choose Yourself Guide to Wealth, I say ideas are the currency of the 21st century. So so knowledge is actual currency in today's economy.
And I think that's the world we live in. It's like this knowledge divide, right? It's the people who know and people who don't know, certain things. And the information is out there, right? They're in their books and it's online, but a lot of people don't have the ability or the skill set, the capabilities to be able to filter through it, to be able to learn it, read it, absorb it, retain it, perform. The reason why memory is so important is because, everyone could say that, they could go on Google and, and these facts are at their fingertips. But at any given time, it's like our life is a reflection of our decisions that we've made to this point, right? That's pretty accurate, right? That our decisions we've made to this point are pretty much, it's reflected in our lifestyle and such. But
there's kind of like a funny self-help quote related to that, in the sense that if you're having a lot of problems and you start deciding things based on how you've always decided things, you have to sort of remind yourself, well, it's all of your decisions in the past that got you here. So that's why you almost need outside help to kind of get you out of here.
And there's a great book called The Structure of Scientific Revolution.
Oh yeah, that is a great book. That's like 4 decades old, right?
It's an older book, and it basically says that that there's this incredible pattern where most of the big advancements in industries, whether it's automotive or it's computers or you name it, fashion, usually comes from people outside the industry, because it takes somebody from the outside to look in saying, hey guys, why aren't you doing it this way?
Well, look at rocketry and space exploration. NASA is outsourcing to SpaceX. Elon Musk was, he made PayPal. He wasn't a rocket scientist.
Right.
And Jeff Bezos has Blue Origin going into space, and Richard Branson has Virgin Galactic. So you have a bookseller, a PayPal guy, and a music magazine guy who are leading the next revolution into outer space.
Right, people outside the industry, because if you're in the industry, by definition, you've been trained the same way. You have the same blind spots, the same scotomas, right, that people have.
Scotoma,
like a blind. It's like a mental, in psychology, it's like a mental blind spot to not be able to put your focus in a certain area because we're not trained to do so. And that's why actually I think one of the best things for people to make better decisions is just is to change their perspective, and very applicable. So I think everyone listening to this has a decision they've been putting off that's important in their health or relationships, where they're going to live, what they're going to do, who they're going to be with, whatever. But a lot of people, going back to remembering lessons, how we started this conversation, a lot of people repeat the same issues. They go on to another relationship, but they bring themselves with them. And what I'm thinking is part of it is when they're in that relationship and they're doing that thing, they're seeing things from the same perspective. And that's why I think sometimes it's important to change place or change people you spend time with. They always say you are, your environment, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, because it shapes your values, it shapes our beliefs. And I think if people want to make better decisions, like there's this process called 6 thinking hats. by Edward de Bono. And basically, the summary of it is basically saying that if you have a problem that you need to solve, if you need to make a better decision, one of the ways of doing it is to pretend that you're wearing 6 different hats. And so the idea here is, if you're constantly as Einstein said, the same level of thinking that's created the problem won't solve the problem. The idea here is that if you're looking at a problem, imagine yourself, for example, putting on a white hat. And when you're wearing this imaginary white hat, you have to look at it from a scientific standpoint, a logical standpoint. And I'll give people a memory aid. Like a white hat is kind of like a white scientist's coat, right? So you have to look at it through the lens of logic and facts, this issue or this problem or this decision. But if you put on a red hat, the red hat is like red, like the heart is, you have to just, you don't look at it logically, you just sort by emotion. How does this make you feel, right? A black hat, for example, is like, is the critic, if you will. And so black is kind of like a judge, like a judge robe, and would remind you that's the critic or the judge. So that's where you judge the idea. The O is the yellow hat is the optimistic point of view, like what could go right in this situation, what's positive about this, which is interesting way of looking at it, which is opposite of, like something that's more judgmental. And the green, finally, the green is growth. And so the green is out of the box thinking. So if you're looking to solve this problem, how do you look at it? What's a solution that we haven't even thought of? Green like growth, like plants or grass and stuff. So what could be a new possible solution? And finally, the 6th hat is blue. And the blue is kind of the overseeing hat of all of them. It'll listen to your answers from the white and the red and the black and the yellow and the green. And blue, kind of like the blue sky, which overlooks everything else, will listen to all the other answers, and then it will come up with the decision after it listens to everything from all these different points of view.
I have never heard of this mental model before. You ever see that book, 100 Decision Models? It like lists like all these different models. I can guarantee you this model is not in that book.
Right.
And I've memorized that.
And the reason why I like this is it's so simple, right? I mean,
let's give an example though. Like come up with an example where this works or where you've helped
this
people.
This is actually it'd be great for you. Like if there's something, is there a decision that you're thinking about or a problem that you want to be able to solve yourself, and we can maybe try this out?
Well, the thing is, this is related to the choiceism, is that really I've whether I realized it or not, I did a lot of this.
Yeah.
And so right now, I really am so much doing everything I love doing. And I don't say this to brag. There's always room to improve. In fact, everything I'm doing, I'm very stressed about because I want to improve on them. Like, so for instance, podcasting, I want to have the best possible podcast. Not that I feel competitive with anybody else, not even that I feel competitive with myself. I just want to provide a better and better service. And I think it gives me pleasure. Going back to your love, life, and lessons, right. I love doing it. So it gives me more and more pleasure as I get better. It makes my life better as I learn more.
Right.
Because I feel like with podcasting, there's a lot of micro skills. Like there's like maybe most people don't realize this, but there's like probably 500 micro skills to being a good podcaster. You probably are realizing this as you're doing your podcast. And so it improves my life. And just the lessons, there's actually then concrete lessons as I pursue what I love, as I do what makes my life better, and as I learn these lessons. So I feel like, in general, not that I have an easy life, because I don't, because I'm only doing the things I want to do, it actually makes my life very difficult, because it puts a lot of pressure on me to improve at them. But I don't really have the problem of making a decision, because I usually know at some point when I'm ready for the next thing.
I like that too. And I like that you do the difficult things, because there's that whole saying that says that if you just do the easy things in life, then life is hard.
Oh, I'll give you an example of that. So I felt, so I've been trying, as many of my listeners know, I've been trying to do stand-up comedy for the past, 4 or 5 months now, really for a year and a half, but more intensely for the past 4 or 5 months. And so I felt like, I need to be I've always been fearless in front of a public speaking crowd, but I wanted to be a little more fearless in front of a potentially enemy crowd. And I also wanted to be tighter on my one-liners. And so to overcome this fear and to get tighter on the one-liners, I went on a subway, and going from 42nd Street down to the Brooklyn Bridge and from the Brooklyn Bridge up to 42nd Street, each stop, I went into a new car and would do stand-up comedy.
Really?
And just to focus on one-liners. And so it forced me to write down one-liners, which is very difficult to do, like a joke in just like 10 words. And then, oh my God, it was so scary to just talk in front of an audience who really does not want you to talk.
Right.
Like they do not want you to open your mouth. And so yeah, I challenge myself on everything, and I try to figure where's the line where I can no longer challenge myself, and then how can I go a tiny bit past that line?
That's
And that's how I came up
fascinating.
with that idea.
I mean, have you done like improv also?
No,
Improv
I
classes?
actually specifically don't like improv.
Really?
Yeah.
It gets recommended to me a bunch, being just a public speaker.
Yeah, no, I think improv's great. I like watching it. Saturday Night Live is all improv, but I like doing things in my brain. Like I like doing things on my own.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, what we're talking about here for just everyone who's listening is just we live in an age right now where there's these. I always talk about superheroes and superpowers, and I think that there's some supervillains, modern day supervillains that generations ago they weren't here. Well, you're talking about in this digital world, we have digital overload, right? Where we feel like there's too much information, too little time, right? The amount of information is doubling at dizzying speeds. I think most people who are listening to this could appreciate they have things they need to learn, but it feels like it's taking a sip of water out of a fire hose, right? With the amount and the half-life of information is just, it's so quick. People who are graduating school, a lot of the stuff that they're learning is not even accurate. And so there's this digital overload and overwhelm, which creates information fatigue. They call it information fatigue syndrome, right? Higher blood pressure, compression of leisure time, more sleeplessness.
Can I ask you about that real quickly?
Yeah.
I feel like it's not just digital overload, and this is related to you suggesting earlier in the first hour, don't check your phone.
Yeah.
I feel like it's not only like there's so much information that happens every morning, it's also there's a lot of annoying information.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, he went to Greece on vacation and they're all together. Why didn't they invite me? Like there's all this, like you see all these things your friends are doing because they only are giving you a filtered version of the information about their life.
Right.
And you're like, oh, I didn't do that. And so it's not just digital overload. It's like digital, like you suck,
right?
And everyone else is great, and that's like forced down your throat.
And we know, and we've heard these terms, right? Like Facebook depression, and these things where everyone's seeing the most amazing highlight reel of everyone's life, as opposed to what's going on, on a day-to-day basis. So people get depressed because there's this huge FOMO, and that people are missing out, and they're not good enough. And fundamentally, I think one of the big human the fears that we have is that we're not good enough, right? We're not good enough, so we're not going to be loved. And if we're not going to be loved, we're not going to, survive because, we needed to be loved by our parents. Otherwise, we had no protection. And
that's so interesting. So you're saying kind of this Facebook depression or viewing this highlight reel of everyone else's life, it's almost, and I'm going to use the bag of chemicals analogy again, it's almost pushing down your oxytocin, which is the neurochemical which tells you where you are in social acceptance of the tribe. So when you see that all the tribe is having fun, but hey, I didn't have fun last night, you're feeling like that the tribe is kind of kicking you, pushing you towards the fringe where the lion is going to potentially eat you first.
Right. I mean, it's tough because we learn through contrast and comparison through things. And so when we see people succeeding or having it puts us in a place where we feel like we might not measure up. And I think that ultimately that's one of the deepest fears we have, whether it's, the root cause of, challenges where people feel vulnerable, public speaking. I don't know how have you always been natural on stage and in media?
No, but here's where I have up until the 1 second before I'm on stage, incredibly terrified. So
Really?
I will even say to the conference organizer, I'm sorry, I'm leaving. I'm too scared. But once the mic is in my hand and I'm looking at the audience and I start, then it's like somehow I don't know what happens. It's like I get this boost of energy and I'm like a different person and I'm fearless. And I know beforehand that's probably going to happen, but I'm still scared to death. I am scared all the time. Aren't I scared all the time? So I'm scared all the time.
Yeah, I can appreciate that because when I grew up with this brain injury and such, I would actually, if a teacher in high school asked me to do and talk about my book report in front of class, I would lie and say I didn't do it, and I would throw it out on the way out because I was so terrified, of public speaking. And it's interesting because my two biggest challenges growing up were learning and public speaking, and you could say the universe has a weird sense of humor because that's what I do pretty much every week.
But I find that it's funny. I find that with a lot of my guests that the things they were specifically challenged with, the overcoming those challenges make them an expert. So for instance, I wrote a book called The Power of No.
Sure.
So why it's important to be able to say no in your life. I didn't write it because I was such a great expert at saying no. I wrote it because I'm really non-confrontational and horrible at saying no.
Right.
So the exploration of that led to the book.
And it's interesting to see when a struggle could turn into a strength. Like my biggest mess growing up was my learning disabilities, and now my mess has become my message.
Well, I love that mess goes to message. But I want to repeat your story, which we talked about before, which is you were in college, and I guess it was your roommate's dad asked you to write down kind of the 10 things you were interested in. And you might have felt unconfident about them. And he said, Jim, you're this close. And he put his fingers close together. You're this close from achieving all of them.
Right.
And that is a very choicest philosophy also, because I feel like you then started doing the things you love doing that would improve your life. And you started looking for the lessons that would help you with memory and brain performance and so on.
Yeah, and it's about responsibility, right? Because I feel like the most successful, productive, fulfilled people, they feel like the locus of control is coming from the inside, that they are at cause, that life is not happening to them, but it's happening them, more for them in their favor.
So it's the same thing we discussed earlier of like blaming circumstances to reduce stress as opposed to doing something to reduce stress. So what did you do when this guy said that to you?
Right.
What did you start doing that anybody can start doing in some analogy or metaphor or whatever? What did you start doing to kind of build the life and career that you have now?
Right. So when I was 18 years old and I met this gentleman, I was ready to quit my freshman year of school, and because it was just not for me. I felt like that I wasn't smart enough, I wasn't good enough, I wasn't getting the grades, and I was just learning challenge. And it's funny because when you argue for your limitations, you get to keep them, right? And I was always arguing, saying I'm not smart enough, I'm not good. It's this script that we have, this story that keeps us from what we, what we desire and what we deserve. And so I'm fighting for my limitations with him, and he's saying, well, why are you in school? What do you want to do, be, have, share? And I start coming up with things, and he makes me write them down like a bucket list. And when he looks at it, as you said, he says, Jim, you're this close to everything on that list, and he spreads his index fingers about a foot apart. And I was like, no way, give me 10 lifetimes, I'm not going to crack that list. And then he puts his two fingers on the side of my head, inside of my temple, meaning it's my brain inside there that's going to be the key. And he takes me into a room of his home that I've never seen before. It's wall to wall, ceiling to floor, covered in books. And remember, at this time, I'm learning challenge. I never read a book cover to cover. I mean, to be equivalent of somebody who's phobic about snakes walking into a room full of snakes. I mean, that's how I felt in that library, right? And what makes it worse, he started grabbing snakes from the shelves and handing them to me. And I started looking at these titles and these biographies of men and women in history and some very early personal growth books that you and I have read, like Think and Grow Rich, The Power of Positive Thinking, Psycho-Cybernetics, How to Win Friends and Influence People, like all the classics, right? Dale Carnegie and Napoleon Hill and everyone. And so he says, Jim, I want you to read one book a week. And I'm like, are you crazy? I have all this schoolwork. I just told you I have midterms. I can't even keep up with what I already have. And he said, Jim, don't let school get in the way of your education, right? Famous Mark Twain quote. But I didn't know that because this was 25 years ago. And I'm like, that's a great quote and saying, but I still can't read one book a week. And then very smart man, he takes out my bucket list, which he still has, and he starts reading every single one of my dreams out loud. And something about this stranger is obviously very successful, hearing my dreams and my fantasies, my goals in somebody else's voice in the universe, mess with my heart, my mind, something fierce. And honestly, James, a lot of things on that list were things I wanted to do for my family that they could never afford to do for themselves. And with that extra leverage, and we know the power of drive and having reasons and start with why and such. With those whys, I agreed to read one book a week on top of my schoolwork. So now I'm sitting at school and I have a pile of books, I have to read for school, and then a pile of books that I want to read that I promised. And I want to fulfill my commitments. and I can't keep up. And that's where it goes downhill. You know, I don't eat, I don't sleep, I don't work out, I don't spend time with friends, family. I just live in the library. And that's where I had another accident. I ended up passing out in the library. I fell down a flight of stairs. I hit my head again, and I woke up 2 days later in the hospital. And at this point, I mean, I've lost so much weight because I wasn't eating.
Were you depressed?
Yeah, I was. I was very depressed. I was in a very dark place. It's not even when I'm talking about it, you know, I get a little, you know, choked up. But I was down to 117 pounds. I thought I died, and you know it was a bad place. And when I woke up, another part of me woke up saying there has to be a better way. What I'm doing is not working for me. And that's when I started studying like those books and studying the brain. I want to understand this thing where I want to understand how my brain works so I can work my brain. And I started studying adult learning theory. I found a book, like, I'm not saying it's the law of attraction, but I visited one of my friends on campus, and on the book of his roommate's, like, you know, bed was like a book on speed reading. I've never even heard of speed reading before. And I started studying that and the old school memory training and everything. And then about 60 days, 2 months into it, a light switch just popped on, and I started to understand things for the first time. I started to have better focus, retention. I started to do better in school, and with my grades improving, my life improved.
Why do you think? What is that light switch? Is it something that happens naturally when you put 6 months of thought and, you know, kind of responsible thought into something and reading and so on?
I mean, I think when people do deep immersion, I mean, we can learn things lots of different ways. There's a way of, you know, called spaced repetition, where we break things down into intervals, like, you know, kind of like working out, where we do some Nautilus training here. Like we spread things out and consolidate from short-term to long-term memory. But another way of learning is through just deep immersion, right? Where you have no distractions. You're putting yourself in an environment where you're feeding your mind this information for 8+ hours. And that's what I was doing. I remember talked about this, but I remember the moment where I actually understood there was a difference. Because sometimes you don't see your progress because you're in it. Kind of like, you know, with your kids, you look at your kids and you don't know if they've grown a lot, but friends who haven't seen them for 6 months or a year, they see the big growth because it's contrast. And so the time where I realized I had these superpowers was about 60 days into it. I was in a lecture center, a few hundred people there. And back then there were no computers. There was just like, you know, remember those like overhead projectors where you'd write with like one of those pens and stuff. They put something on the overhead projector on the screen in the lecture center, and, you know, it's all these words and, you know, paragraphs. And then I started laughing out loud, and I'm very shy in class, right? If anything, the superpower I had back in school was invisibility, because I didn't want to be noticed. I didn't want to be heard. I mean, deep down, I think all of us want to be heard and seen, but I really didn't want that, any attention or spotlight on me. But I started laughing out loud. I didn't even realize I was doing it because I was reading, you know, I read what they put on the screen. And then everyone looked at me, and I felt very awkward. And then about 15 seconds later, everyone else started to laugh. And I realized that I read what was on the screen really quickly, right? Because of these newfound powers. And that's where I realized like there was a fundamental difference. I don't even think it's like reading at 500, 600, 800 words a minute, where the average person reads about 200 words a minute is speed reading. I feel like it's just regular reading. We're just not taught these skills. I feel like we live in, and we had this conversation last time, we live in this age of, when we're talking about Elon Musk, right? We're talking about autonomous electric cars and spaceships that are going to Mars, but our vehicle of choice when it comes to learning is like a horse and buggy. It hasn't changed a whole lot as much as the world has changed. And I feel like if someone's listening to this, they feel like these three villains is the digital overload, which is like too much information, and it's not even filtered, right? There's more information being created, you know, every day with blogs and podcasts and, you know, YouTube and everything
Trump's
else.
Tweets,
right? Exactly.
And I don't even say that as a joke. That's actual competition for. Right. With other information.
And going back to our original conversation about not checking your phone the first hour of the day, when you're in that alpha theta state, when you're in that relaxed state of awareness, you're fully impressionable, and you're going through your phone, the very first thing when you're that impressionable and suggestible, and you're looking at comment, because you're getting these dopamine fixes, right? For every time you get a like, a share, a comment, and you're frying, metaphorically, you're frying your brain, you're fatiguing it. Remember, we're talking about like choice fatigue and decision fatigue. We're using all those choices and those decisions to be able to scroll and look at cats and doing all these, you know, these memes and everything. And we wonder why we're tired. And going back to this idea of decision fatigue, the reason why, you know, Mark Zuckerberg or Tony Hsieh, you know, these people, they wear the same sweatshirt, or Tony always wears the same Zappos t-shirt, you know, being CEO of Zappos. You know, most of the time is you ask them and they say that they do it because they don't want to waste one of their good decisions on what am I going to wear today, right? They want to systemize everything. and turn everything to processes so they don't have to, so they can focus on the things that matter the most to them. And so that's one of the challenges, digital overload. But the other two, really quickly, are digital distraction, right? Because every time the other challenge with opening your phone, so there's two challenges with checking your phone the first hour of the day. Number one, it trains you to be distracted, right? Because you're looking at all the different things. And also the other problem is training you to be reactive, meaning that when you're looking at text messages and emails and all these things from people wanting something from you, right? Or fires that you need to put out, then you're training yourself not only to be distracted, but you're training yourself to be reactive. And you're never going to have, especially the entrepreneurs that need to take the invisible, make it visible, turn their vision into reality and such like that. Then you're not going to have a quality of life if you're just reacting to all the things of everyone else's agenda that they have for you. And so that's why picking up the phone that state is really bad to do, rather than sitting down, doing what you're doing, being a maker, right? Planning the 3 things that you need to accomplish personally and professionally, and keeping your eye on the prize. The third obstacle besides digital overload and digital distraction is digital dementia. And digital dementia is this new term used in healthcare, basically saying that our brains, like, we're getting more and more forgetful. Everyone's feeling like senior moments are coming early, even if they're, in their 20s or 30s. Why is this happening? And part of it is doctors are saying it's because we're relying so much on our smart devices. And it keeps our to-dos, it keeps our calendars, it does simple math for us, it remembers all the phone numbers, all things that are convenient. Like, nobody wants to memorize hundreds of phone numbers, right? But we've lost the ability to do so. And that creates a lot of challenges, and they call it digital dementia, where your mind is like a muscle, it grows stronger with use. But
do you think that's true? Do you think that because someone's outsourced their contacts to a phone list, they're not actually just saying, okay, now my mind can do other things that are more...
And I think that, so nature abhors a vacuum. So if you have this extra free time that you're saving from reading fast or anything, an hour or two a day, then you're always going to fill it with something else. I would hope that so there's 2 parts to it. I think that it's not black and white. I rely personally on my smart devices because I don't want to memorize everything. It's convenient. But I also don't want to lose the ability to if I need to. And so the challenge becomes people, if you lost half of your memories, like if you forgot half the people that you know, if you forgot half the words, like the understanding of what those words meant, if you forget, you'd be at a disadvantage, obviously, right?
Right.
And so the same could be said if you could potentially double your capacity to be able to remember these things, you'd be twice as effective in these ways also. Having information at your mental fingertips, especially in this age where, we're paid for our expertise, for our knowledge bank, and our ability to make good decisions. We can only make good decisions based on the information that we remember at any given time. But if we lost that information, we're not very productive, and our performance, obviously hurts. The other thing I would say for digital distraction is we live in a world where people they're addicted to being busy. They start bragging that they're busy all the time. They wear it as a badge of honor, which is a challenge, because if you are getting significance or you're meeting some of these values by being busy, because basically when someone's saying that they're busy, which is something we all have a habit of saying, is just basically we're saying is we're important. Like, we're so important, we have lots to do, right? And if people are getting rewarded through that, some kind of secondary gain out of it, the challenge is they start unconsciously designing their life to be busy all the time so they could feel that, that importance. And that, we know busyness is not necessarily the answer. Right? The whole conversation we're having in the first half of this conversation was about putting first things first, right? You're focusing on life, love, and lessons, the things that we value most. We're majoring in the major things in life.
Let's stop to take a quick break. We'll be right back. I just want to say thank you to everyone listening to this. Doing a podcast is the activity that I've enjoyed most in these past few years. I've interviewed so many fascinating people. I've researched so hard, and I've really wanted to bring the highest quality information about peak performance, really, to the listeners. So I hope you enjoy what I've been doing. I don't ask for a lot, but please take a moment to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or wherever it is you get your podcasts. It will only take a second, but it will help other people discover the podcast. To see the show notes, just head on over to jamesaltucher.com/podcast. While you are there, you can join my free insiders list to get notified when I post a new podcast. Once again, thanks so much for joining me on the journey of this podcast. let's say I was just focused on money, which I was for many, many years, and I was making it, I was losing it, I was making it, I was losing it. I never felt good like up in my chest, meaning I never loved what I was doing. I always thought like, I just always felt this stress in my gut, and I would even get like sick in my stomach because I was just always thinking about money, and it wasn't something I necessarily, and I was doing things that I didn't necessarily love doing. And it's only like in the past, let's say 7 years, it started moving up. What my activities during the day started moving up my how I felt in my body. So now I can tell when something's a good decision if I feel it up here in my chest, if I love it. You know, whether I'm good or bad at it, if I love it, you know, then I can say, oh, okay, this is something I want to get a lesson from, or this is something I want to improve my life with because it makes me feel better up here. And that's much more pleasant than the worry I always had in my stomach. It's very biological for me, decision making.
Yeah, one of the things that, you know, there's always some kind of gift that comes out of some of these challenges. And one of the themes you and I were talking about is how struggles become strengths, that through challenge comes a level of change, right? How the mess becomes some kind of new message for people. We were talking before we got in the studio about my sleep issues. And so I don't talk about this publicly ever, but I think it could help maybe a couple people who are listening to this. So I've suffered from sleep apnea for the past 5 years, very, very severe. Because as you get older, it gets worse and worse. And sleep apnea is this breathing disorder where you don't get enough oxygen when you sleep, so you wake up suffocating. And I use a CPAP breathing, device to help me get air, and dental devices that put my jaw forward and helps me to be able to breathe a little bit easier. But nothing's really hacked it, right? And so,
do you think it's related to the? And I've seen photos of you like in the hospital bed,
right,
like really looking like a wreck through this. Do you think it's related to those early brain injuries?
No, the apnea is actually a structure issue. It's actually because my tonsils were just very large, and so it's kind of this soft palate and uvula in the back of my throat prevented oxygen to go through it. And usually, it's the people who usually suffer from it. And I recommend anyone who wakes up still fatigued to get a sleep study done. You could do it at your doctor could do it and order it for everybody. But I think more people suffer from this than they realize. And so what it is it's usually because somebody's overweight and they carry a lot of extra weight around their neck, and it prevents them from being able to get to breathe. But for me, it was purely genetic. What made it, and so I've had surgery and everything. I was hospitalized a number of times where I was getting about 90 minutes to 2 hours a night for 5 years combined.
And obviously, and this has come up on the podcast a lot, essentially most people need 8 hours.
Right.
Not even on average. You just need 8 hours every day.
You need more. I don't know what the range is, but certainly more than a couple hours of sleep. And because because the sleep is, people think that, like when I ask people how do they build muscles, they I go to the gym, I exercise. But in actuality, that's not where you're building the muscle. That's where you're literally tearing the muscle down. When you're building it is when you rest. And a lot of that is sleep is so important. It's like one of the best life hacks there is, performance hacks, because when you don't sleep, your ability to make good decisions, your memory, your focus, everything is compromised the next day, right? And so that's a big challenge. And so for me, I never got enough sleep because I couldn't breathe. I would stop breathing 200 plus times a night. Each time was more than 10 seconds. So I'd wake up, the equivalent of this sleep doctor was saying, it's like, hey, it's like somebody's coming in 200 times a night and suffocating you with a pillow, and so it's no wonder you're waking up.
Did you realize this was an issue, or did you think this is just how everybody slept?
No, I've always realized I've never slept really well, but as we get older, it gets worse progressively. Sleep apnea does. My challenge, the reason I bring this up though, is the gift, because what I've learned to do is train myself when I go through struggle. I'm trying to think, what's the gift in this, right? Because to be able to. People don't realize you were talking about all the struggles that people have and how people could grow from it. And that's actually a powerful word, because we've all heard of post-traumatic stress, right? Disorder. And people don't realize that there's also this thing called post-traumatic growth, that going through trauma, going through adversity, going through extreme difficulty, the most difficult times of your life, there's a number of percentage of people that come through it and they're actually thankful for that, even though that they wouldn't wish it on anybody that they cared about or anybody, because what they had to go through in terms of suffering, they got a certain level of meaning from that experience. They got a certain level of commitment. They got a certain level of newfound strength from it, and it changed everything. Like for me, I struggled for a decade and a half with my learning challenges, but I wouldn't trade that for anything because it put me on this path, right? And so I would say, what's the gift out of me not be able to sleep for 5 years and travel to Dubai and Hong Kong and do these mental feats, memorize 100 people's names from stage when I'm really, really tired. I would say part of it is certainly is willpower because, I focus on gratitude. I get very scared going on stage still because I've never, it's more my nature. I'm more introverted, but I focus on, a couple people I feel like I can help in the audience, and it puts my focus off of myself. I think that's important. And I focus on giving, not to be able to get, but giving because it's who we are. And I would say that the gift out of not sleeping is two things. Number one is, I would say that it's forced me to double down on the things that I teach because I could be as efficient and effective as I am, getting done what a lot of people, it would take 3 or 4 people to do because I do what I teach, right, in terms of learning and performance and all these brain hacks and stuff. But number two, besides doubling down on my capabilities and unique abilities, which I think everybody has, is I've gotten really good at filtering exactly what you're saying in terms of not overcommitting, saying no more often because it's this whole idea where I feel like a lot of stress that we're carrying is unconscious because we're overcommitting to so many different things. We have so many projects. We're trying to do so many things parallel. And we know that multitasking is a myth, that's not even accurate, that people who feel like they're multitasking. I'm not talking about walking and thinking and being on the phone. I'm talking about doing 2 cognitive activities or more at once where you're switching. And that's exactly what it is. The actual term for multitasking, more accurate, is task switching. Right, you're going from task to task, but every time you switch, the researchers are saying you're losing about 5 to 20 minutes because it takes that much time to regain your focus, regain your flow, if you will. Also, those people are multitasking. Not only is it wasting time, so their productivity goes down, but also they're making more errors, which is a big challenge also. But we live in this world where people are overcommitting and they have all these windows open on their computer, metaphorically, even if it's minimized, it's still taking up space. And I'm saying that when I was sleeping 2 hours a night, now it's up now to 3 or 4 hours now. It's because I'm just working with some specialists. But I would say that it forced me to really analyze the things that I want to. And, in the spirit of, the one thing or essentialism, it's everything is hell yes or it's hell no. And so, like right now, James, there's nowhere else I'd rather be. There's nowhere I'd rather be with because.
Well, I am certainly glad about that.
because it was like automatic yes. And that's how I filter things. You remember you're saying in your chest, you do the things that you love, even if they're more difficult, they're more fulfilling for you. And I would say that it's good because you want to go through difficulty. Because anyone who's been given everything and if they have had an easy life, they don't develop pride and they don't develop strength. Right. And I feel like over the past 5 years, it's forced me to really double down again on my capabilities, the things that I teach about speed reading, memory, just things that keep me productive. And also it's forced me to say no 80% of the time and only say yes to the things that really light me up. And I think
so in terms of like making those decisions, do you go back? Let's go back to the hats. So the white hat, red hat, black, yellow, green, blue. Did you use, let's put it in that context. So, white hat, when you're making a decision, what's an example decision you've made where you've used this mental model?
Yeah, I mean, so this would be really good. So I had surgery. I haven't talked about this, but one of the things I was being hospitalized every single year because I would go X amount of days without sleep, and it got very, very bad, and I would have to be sedated and such. And I wanted to get the surgery done. They call it a UPPP, where it's pretty severe. It's not like having your tonsils out when you're a kid. As adults, it's a lot more pain associated to it. And the challenge is I found out that 80% of the time it's a failure. And so I'm like, why is everybody having this surgery and 4 out of 5 times it doesn't work, right? Because it's a very painful process, very costly process. And a number of my celebrity clients had gone through it and they still hasn't fixed the problem with their breathing. And so I use the 6 hats as an example. I won't go through it completely, but when I'm wearing the white hat, I was going through it and looking at analytically, like looking at the data, looking at the research. Why is it just 4 out of 5? And also part of it is just, the red hat, I was thinking, how do I feel about this? You know what I mean? Like what's the emotional attachment? Because I don't like being, nobody wants to be under anesthesia and like out and everything else.
Actually,
like that.
I like being under anesthesia, but other than that,
Yeah.
it's so pleasant. They say count down to 10,
like,
and then by 7 you're gone, and then you are groggy when you wake up, and it's like this new world. Anyway, it's like this science fiction aspect of anesthesia that I like.
And I started going through it. I looked at it through the critical standpoint, wearing the black hat, saying what could go wrong here and everything. And I started looking at the yellow and what could go right. And then when I looked at the one that actually made a difference was the green one. The green one is what other options do I have? And I started to say, like, I started to ask around, and I happened to be talking. I just did a podcast on effective listening skills, and I would love to talk to you about like how you become such a great listener. But I was having breakfast with Larry King, and I was asking him these questions, and I was losing my voice. And I was very concerned, and he recommended this doctor in Los Angeles, and which led to another conversation with the head of throat at UCLA. Anyway, short story, I was like, I got a meeting with this guy, and I was looking at green. I was like, is there any other option besides this surgery? And she's like, yes, what we do here is we actually don't do this surgery unless it's absolutely necessary. And what we do that other doctors don't is we actually sedate you and with anesthesia, and then put a scope up your nose, down your throat to actually see where the obstruction is. Because lots of times it's actually the tongue that falls in the back of your throat that makes you snore, or you can't breathe, and that's why the apnea is there. And obviously they're not doing surgery on your tongue, but most are not effective because they're taking out parts of your oral cavity that doesn't need to be taken out.
Why doesn't everybody do that? That seems like kind of an obvious
thing. So
thing.
he put me to sleep, and then I said, he gave him the specific instructions that if you see that my tonsils are actually the presenting issue, then do take them out. And that's what he did. And it led to this new solution where I felt really good about it. And it's made a difference. It's, instead of getting 90 minutes, I'm getting 3 or 4 hours still, and I'm still building it up, but I'm in the middle of the process. But I think, like, again, our lifestyle, our life, our happiness is a reflection of our decisions. But nobody teaches us these things. School is a great place to learn what to learn: math, history, science, Spanish, important, subjects, but zero on how to learn, how to listen, how to be creative, how to think for yourself, how to solve problems, how to focus, concentrate, how to read faster, how to remember things, how to be financially literate, all the things that could really serve us.
So obviously this became a passion for you in part because your mess became your message. How did you first kind of get into the business of having, all these clients where you would help them, improve their memory, speed read, do brain performance hacks and so on? Completely.
And so I know you have a lot of entrepreneur listeners or people who are on that path that starts business or they're transitioning and such, or they value their freedom and they want to. So I would say that, I would say a couple things. So, when I was growing up, my parents immigrated here, and our family lived in the back of a laundromat, in this small room and such. We had no financial means. We didn't. I had no education, right? I had just learning challenges and disabilities, and I knew nobody. So a lot of people, when they want to be successful, they just say like, oh, you need money, you need education, you need contacts, connections, and network and everything. But I feel like it's not, and people have said this before, so I'm not the one saying this, but it's not about your resources, external resources. I find it's the most successful people have strong internal resourcefulness, creativity, ability to think, persistence, grit, growth, all that stuff, discipline. And so I would say that struggling all through my academically, when I had these breakthroughs, how I ended up teaching this and turned this into my career, and this is my 25th year of teaching. Well, I haven't thought about that. So yes, 25 years. Is that when I got these results, I started helping friends, and they started getting amazing results. Right?
Like, what was the first friend you helped?
Yeah, so I helped my roommates and suite mates because they saw like a big change in not just my grades, but just everything. Right? You have one thing that's holding you back, and you fix it, and all of a sudden it opens up. Like, it primes the pumps, allows us to
not only that, you find you have a passion for what
especially because this was like my kryptonite, right? And so that's the challenge. It's like every single day, 1,000 times a day, unconsciously, and probably hundreds of times consciously, I was thinking like, I'm not smart enough, I'm not good enough, I can't do this, and I would make up all these stories. And so when you overcome the biggest challenge that you have, I mean, it liberates you, something fierce, right? And so I would say that I started helping people and tutoring them, and then I wanted to help other people, right? And then someone was saying, hey, because I didn't have any money in school, and friends were always ordering Pizza Hut and chicken and broccoli, and I was like 40 pounds underweight and such, so I couldn't afford to do that. So his friends were like, why don't you tutor this? And I was like, I don't know the first thing about doing that, but I noticed that there was a classroom that wasn't being used one Thursday night around 7 o'clock. And I saw, I had this idea. Next Thursday at 7 o'clock, I'm going to put 5 or 10 people in that room for free and just teach them for a couple hours. And then maybe afterwards, one of them or two of them wants to be tutored, ongoing, so I could eat. And then, so I go back to my dorm room, I take out a piece of paper, and it's my very first marketing. I wrote, free speed reading memory tips, get better grades in less time, Thursday, 7 o'clock, and I put the lecture center room in there.
I love this. So basically, it's as if you anointed yourself a professor in a university setting,
Right.
took over a classroom without permission, of course, from the gatekeeper, which was the university who
Yes.
decides what courses go in every classroom. You announced it as if you were,
So it was it was exactly that. Like the next morning, so I wrote this down, hand wrote it, and the flyer. And then the next morning, I make some photocopies and I put it on bulletin boards on the way to class. Not a lot, but just on the way to class. Fast forward to Thursday, the next Thursday, 7 o'clock, I'm walking into the classroom and I'm just hoping 5-10 people show up for this information session. And I turn the corner and there's a crowd of people outside the room. And I honestly, James, my first instinct is this, is oh my goodness, I was like, I hope whatever's going on ends soon so I could do my thing, right? And I go there, I can't even get in the doorway. There's this tall guy. I was like, what's going on inside? And this guy looks at me, he's like, there's a speed reading class. And I was like, no. I was like, wow, what a coincidence. Like, what are the odds there's a speed reading class, the same room, the same night, the same time? And I push my way in. This is how slow my mind is, right? And there's a room full of people there, even people standing in the back, and there's no one teaching. And that's where I realized, it took my slow brain all that time to realize why they're all there. And I do a head count, and instead of 10 people, there's 110 people in that room. Now, keep in mind, like, I'm 18 years old, I'm wearing t-shirt, shorts, I have nothing prepared to talk about, and I'm phobic of public speaking. So my heart's beating out of my chest, I can't even breathe. So I leave.
Oh my gosh.
And because I can't perform, right? And I think we've all had these choice points, and I'm embarrassed, but I left. And there's these fountains, because I can't even go back to my dorm room, because I don't, my friends will just make fun of me, right? And ask me what happened and everything. But I go to these fountains and I just meditate, and I think meditation is part of my practice. It's part of my daily routine. I just like to meditate 20 minutes a day. I think it's important to slow down, get that white space. Anyway, when I'm meditating, I hear this voice inside my head, and it's my mom's. And basically she says to me that you promised these 100 people that you're going to help them, and they all came out, and you're disappointing them and you're disappointing me, kind of thing. And I'm doing this walking meditation back to my dorm room, and I don't even realize it, but I stop and I take one step back to the classroom. And it's funny, James, because how one step in another direction can completely change your destination, your destiny, right?
I can relate to that a lot. It's not even, so in your case, a physical step, but I think any small committal action in the right direction kind of says, well, I did that, I could do the next thing.
Exactly.
So I just want to give an example, and it's totally not related to this. Yours is much more important and serious, and yours is this. I've read a lot about you, and this is the first time I'm hearing this origin story. So believe me, I'm going to make you continue it. But when I described you before this subway comedy, the first I wanted to videotape it. So someone was with me with a video camera, and I was like, forget it. I'm not going to do it. We're just going to get off the subway at the next stop and go home. But then I said, why don't you just turn on the video? And I still was not planning on doing anything, but that led to a series of mental actions that said, ladies and gentlemen, and, but okay,
it
so
does,
go ahead.
It does. And I just did, I have this podcast, right? And it's a solo podcast, but I did one on procrastination. And I think that a lot of times people don't take on things because they have no momentum. And I think just taking one step, even going back to the Zeigarnik Effect, makes it a little bit easier. This researcher out of Stanford, his name is Dr. BJ Fogg. He's a habits expert, and one of his students co-founded Instagram. Think about, you want to make those addictive and habitual for people to check in. I think they say that the average person checks in on Instagram like 54 times a day or something.
Certainly my kids do.
It's extraordinary. And if you're doing less, then that means there's somebody out there doing a lot more. But when you're talking about habits, he has this idea of tiny habits where, for example, like everyone knows they should floss, but a lot of people don't floss their teeth. And he's saying, okay, just floss one tooth. Because are you going to stop at one tooth? Of course not. You're going to end up doing all your teeth, but it's just doing something. Even when I get people to do speed reading and I do these drills with them, I just say, hey, don't worry about reading for 20, 30 minutes. Just read one word, right? Just get the book opened, and then from there, people could build positive momentum.
And that's often very good writing advice. Like, okay, don't write a chapter of your novel. Write 100 words of what happened to you this morning, and that kind of
Exactly.
loosens or greases the pipes or whatever the analogy is.
Is that how you got you through your books?
Probably, yeah, because you experience writer's block all the time. But okay, so you take a step back.
So I basically take a step back to the classroom. I don't even realize it's unconscious, and I go back to the classroom. Same 100 people are there, and I end up doing a talk for 2 hours. And honestly,
what was the first thing you said? You get up into the front. You must have said,
"Yeah, okay." So first
thanks
of all,
everyone for coming. But after that,
and I apologized for starting late and everything. And but I honestly, as a memory coach, as a memory expert, I don't remember what I talked about for 2 hours, because I don't know how you are on stage, but this is my very first public speaking experience, right? And it just flowed right through me. And I don't know, some speakers, I know Wayne Dyer did that. He never prepared. He just trusted that, that he'd be able to present and such. But I don't remember what I did for 2 hours, but I remember exactly when I came out of trance at the end, I was just like, well, I don't know what to do. Like, how am I going to, and I was just like, I remember I was like, look, I don't know if I could help all of you, but I need about 10 hours to teach you what I know to get better grades in less time, speed reading and study and memorize all this stuff. It's like I get $30 an hour to tutor. And I made this up because I used to get $30 an hour teaching tennis back in high school. And that was my only reference, right? I'm making this up as I go. And I said, I'm not sure how to do this, but maybe meet a couple hours a week for 5 weeks. And if you're interested, I'll be in the Student Center tomorrow at noon to answer your questions. And I swear to you, James, 100 people just get up and they just leave. Nobody talks to me. Like, I'm totally confused. I feel two things. I feel completely exhausted and spent, because when you face your biggest fear, afterwards I was wiped out. Mentally, physically, emotionally, I was just spent. And I was also confused. Like, I was like, did anyone like me? Did I just totally mess this up? And I was so spent, and exhausted, I actually fell asleep on the carpet in that classroom. And I got woken up, it was the best sleep of my life to this day. I got woken up the next morning from the class coming in the next morning, and I freaked out. I went back to my dorm room, showered, went to breakfast, went to class. 12 o'clock comes, and I was like, oh shoot, I have to go and meet people. Hopefully one or two of them shows up and are interested in tutoring. When I get to the students here at 12, I'm hoping one or two people are there. That same crowd of people are there. And I swear, after 2 hours, 71 of the 100 kids signed up for a program that didn't even exist. And
how did you have the time? Actually,
and so here's the thing.
That's 140 hours a week.
So I put those individuals. I put them into classes, 3 different classes of 25, right, or 2025. And I didn't realize it because I didn't do the math. That $30 an hour was for 10 hours was $300, because all these kids in the student center, there was the ATM machine was right there. They all went to the ATM machine and took out $300 cash. And I didn't realize they could do that because I didn't even have an ATM card. I didn't even know what that was because I didn't have that, that resource. And so I'm not even 19 years old, and I have $21,000 cash in my backpack. And going back to my original mentor who said, don't let school get in the way of your education, I actually use all the money. Part of it I used to feed my body because I was so underweight, and I ordered food and, Chinese food and Pizza Hut and all that good stuff. But I actually used the majority of it to feed my mind. And I travel around the country, going to every event, seminar, audio program, just to learn my craft.
Because suddenly also, it seems like it's like in stages. It's like, oh, you did this for 6 months, and now suddenly you're getting better grades, and your roommates who you loved and trusted noticed this difference, and you felt, hey, this is a way for me to be higher up in the tribe. So you were getting this mental reward for it. So then you give this class, and then the next stage, which is like, oh my gosh, people I don't even know are rewarding me for it and giving me money. And so, of course, you're going to double down on exactly what it is that's giving you such pleasure.
Exactly. And I take all that revenue, if you will, and I reinvest it back into myself, into my skill set, in terms of my own learning. And the reason why I'm still teaching it to this day is that is one of the students, she is remarkable. She read 30 books in 30 days.
I remember reading this story, and because she wanted to read about battling cancer.
Yeah. And so all the books were health and wellness, maybe by a lot of our mutual friends. And her mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer, was only given 60 days to live by doctors. And the books she was reading was books to help save her mom's life. And she ended up doing so. And
by the way, credit to her mom for listening to her daughter over doctors.
Yeah, and the thing is, and I'm not, again, like people should talk to qualified health practitioners and stuff and get good information to make good decisions. It's just the doctors end up calling it a miracle, but her mother attributed it 100% to the great advice she got from her daughter and learned it from all these books. And that's the thing. That's where I realize the fundamental belief that I have is that if knowledge is power, learning is your superpower. That if knowledge is power, learning is your superpower. And the challenge is we're just not taught how to learn. That's all.
Well, we're not taught how to learn, and we're also not taught what to learn.
Exactly.
And I think, like you said, we can all sit around and read math textbooks, but that might not be something we love. It might not be something that improves my life, and it might not be a lesson that I'm going to be able to kind of take into other areas of my life. So how would you suggest, so someone listening to this, they're listening to all this, and they're like, well, I could read books any day, or I could, listen to podcasts or whatever. What should I, how do I find what I love, what's going to improve my life, and how do I find the lessons that will contribute to that?
Yeah, and I don't think that's necessarily an easy, one line sentence to be able to solve that.
Because you look at your example, it took this series of challenges. It was like the guy bringing you to his library. So he kind of became this weird Yoda-like example. And then the next thing was your roommates sort of rewarding you. And then the next wave was these hundreds of people rewarding you, and then money rewarding you, and then the extra knowledge you were gaining from all these conferences. So there's like a series of stages. Like people sort of think success happens at the end, but you kind of have to reward yourself and celebrate the little successes all along the way. You obviously celebrated the little success of reading that first book, then the little success of your roommates saying, hey, what happened to you? Then the little success of 100 people showing up for a classroom, and so on.
Right. I mean, we've all seen the memes and the graphics on social media where success is not a straight line. It's this really weird, squiggly line. But I think that it's cliche, but I really feel like that we only fail when we fail to learn, right? That, when we win, that we feel happy, right? But when we lose, then we get, instead of happiness, we get wisdom, hopefully. That feedback, if you will. Which is
hard.
It is.
Because it's hard not to get depressed. If you want to get better at tennis and you lose a game of tennis, you might say, ugh, I hate this. I hate this feeling of loss so much. I am not going through it again.
Right. And that's why I think, like, if I was to boil down the characteristics of like that mindset, if you will, success mindset or whatever, I would say 4 Gs. I would say that growth, which, we know that we're grossly underestimating like our capacity, that our intelligence, our potential, our memory is not fixed like our shoe size, right? So this growth mindset, right? When we're green, we grow, and when we're brown, we rot. But besides growth, I would say grit is important. And this is the idea where a lot of success shows up when we show up. And the challenge is when we reach this pain point, a lot of us pull back because we don't want to be disappointed. We don't want to get our hopes up. Or maybe just we just don't have the grit muscles, meaning that like yesterday, I hurt my back a little bit working out, and I went to a chiropractor. And when I was going in the office, there was a cryotherapy place right next door. And I was like, wow, that's neat. Have you done this before? Like,
no.
So there's this idea of cold therapy where that if you bang your knee on a table, you put ice on it, right? To reduce swelling, to reduce inflammation. And we know a lot of athletes and performers, dancers, they take ice baths like Michael Phelps because it lowers the inflammation, helps them recover better. So there's these cryo chambers in most major cities at spas where you could go into this nitrogen chamber and it brings it down to negative 240 degrees, and you're in there in your underwear, basically.
Won't that kill you right away?
No, you're safe. It's safe. I mean, again,
like if I go into a water that's 200 degrees, I'm going to go into. I feel like my body's going to go into shock within 40 seconds.
Right. Well, that'd be pretty. Yeah. I mean, it'd be ice, but so what I'm saying is like there's people like Wim Hof, right, who go in regularly in these ice. In the Arctic and stuff like that, and they go swimming under. It's crazy. It's insane. But anyway, there's these closely monitored spas that they have these cryo chambers, and you go in and you're in there for 90 seconds to 3 minutes max, and it's cold. It's negative 200, negative 240 degrees. But the idea here is it's like a nervous system reset. It helps you lower inflammation and recover better, and all these other benefits. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because the last 30 seconds for me is it's difficult, and I want to leave. And you obviously have the option to leave at any time, but I push myself because for me, grit is like a muscle. That because when you because how we do anything is how we do everything generally. And I want to build that muscle because that will show up in other areas of my life. And so whenever you push yourself in certain ways to get more out of yourself, you tend to do that in other areas when you need it the most. And so growth, grit.
But by the way, just on that point, I notice, and I'm saying this in a positive way, you use a lot of really great cliches. So like, how we do everything is how we do anything, or how we do anything is how we do everything. That's something that's been said, a million times before. It's in lots of books. And I'm not criticizing you saying that. I actually think it's a great way. There's a reason something's a cliche. It actually is a great way to learn a valuable life lesson.
Because there's like all cliches, there's a truth to it. And so I'm stating it more so that we don't see. I think there's a difference between dabbling in something and really becoming more on this path to, for lack of a better word, mastery. Right? I feel like lots of times people have listened to this show, other shows, and they could repeat a lot of what the expert could say because they've heard it somewhere before. But I feel like we don't really we do a disservice to ourselves if we kind of overlook the fundamentals. And for me, in terms of high performance and when it comes to accelerating people's learning and learning things in a fraction of time, I feel like it comes back to the basics in terms of the things that are going to move the needle the most. With the kind of results we want to be able to get. But a lot of times people always want to know the new thing. And for me, the old thing is always the new thing.
I agree with that. So growth.
So we have the 4 Gs I'm talking about. So my main point in bringing this up is people could listen to a podcast, even if they've heard it before, maybe they listen to it in a different way or a deeper way and really think, because I feel like if people aren't doing it, they don't, or if they can't do it, they don't really understand it unless they're doing it.
Well, I think that's really true, and it's so interesting. So I did give a talk related to this once. I was at a conference and everybody was talking about content marketing, which is this idea that, you shouldn't just put up an ad. You should write about what your brand means and what your company's motivation and vision is. And I said, that doesn't actually work. Like, you have to actually do things that show you're living the example of what what you believe in. You can't just write about it, because then it's just theory. Then it's just words. So, and that's related to the grit. Like, you can't say, you Jim Kwik can't say being in cold helps your life unless you have the grit to go through this.
And the 2 things I'll bring up, because I drop these names for the purpose of, if I mention John Smith, a lot of people wouldn't necessarily, doesn't put a picture in people's minds, but a lot of memory has to do with triggers. And that's a lot of what my memory training is based on, controlling triggers. And triggers is a very important element in creating new habits, because there's 3 parts to creating new habits or breaking habits. You're talking about, you have this behavior that you want to create, this new habit. Let's say you want to read 20 minutes a day, or you want to journal, or you want to meditate, or whatever it is. According to Dr. B.J. Fogg, it has 3 parts. They call it BMAT. So B is the behavior, M is motivation, A is the ability, and then T is the trigger. And so motivation, ability, a trigger. And so in order to be able to change a habit, you need the motivation to want that, right? Because if you're not motivated to do it, if your motivation is 0 times anything is going to be 0. So there's not going to be a big change.
And again, I think motivation, just to kind of relate it back, I think that's going to be related a lot to, does this kind of satisfy some of this life, love, lessons idea?
If it's relevant to us, or to a problem that we're suffering from, or to a value that we have. Because a lot of things, going back to school, sine, cosine, x tangent, hypotenuse, y, most people aren't going to remember that, or the periodic table or anything, because it had no relevance to them.
And I would just encourage people listening to this, because I think motivation for a lot of people, particularly young people, and I know this was a motivation for me, is simply money. I need money to afford things that I want to buy, or to not worry, or to protect my family. I think the motivation's got to be one level higher than that, at least. And it's worth thinking about, at least. Even if your motivation is money, at least think about what motivations might exist higher for you.
And I think there's certain things we could do psychologically to enhance our level of motivation.
Like what?
So even putting a number to it, like I just happened to do unconsciously, saying if your motivation happens to be 0, we could always do in a self-assessment. Like, what's my motivation to read this book today? And it happens to be a 4. And I could think about, well, what would I need to do inside my mind or outside in the world, either my perception of it or my procedure on the outside, to be able to make it a 6. Just jump it up 2 points. And I'll say, okay, maybe I'll give myself this reward if I read this book, or maybe if I read this book, I'll be able to do this, and really feeling it, and it increases my inherent motivation. The reason I bring up motivation is because motivation is like a state. It's like a mood, right, of our mind and body. It's like a little snapshot because it's always in flux. It could go from 0 to 10 or whatever. The reason I bring it up is because I find that I could get results with anybody as long as they have two qualities: that they are motivated and that they are teachable. Meaning that, and this is whether you're a parent or you're a teacher, you're a coach, the same thing applies, because you can't help somebody teach them how to speed read or learn a language, whatever it is, if they're not motivated to do so. But even if their motivation was 10 out of 10, if their teachability or their open-mindedness was 0, right, they're not willing to learn new things because they feel like they already know it. Oh, I've been in sales for 40 years, and so what am I going to learn from you, kind of thing. Then teachability, if it happens to be 0, 0 times 10 is still 0, right? But on the opposite, it happens to be if someone's very teachable, maybe 10 out of 10, but their motivation is 0, then they're not going to get the results. So I can't make someone more teachable. I can't motivate somebody inherently because they need something more intrinsic. But if the people have both those qualities, I feel like I could grow them. But going back to the 4 Gs, so we talk about growth mindset.
Oh, no, go back to BMAT. We're
we have
in
a lot
the middle of like 16 acronyms.
Okay,
but BMAT.
And the whole thing with a lot of teaching styles in terms of parables and open loops, we open loops so people want to know what the answer is. But so M is motivation, A is ability. So let's say you want the new habit to be flossing your teeth. You need the ability to know how to floss your teeth, right? If you're to be able to read, you need to be literate.
Let me ask you about this though. Let's say I want to be in better shape, and the sport I love the most is tennis. I'm just making this up. And so I'm motivated to play a lot of tennis to get in better shape. But I'm 50 years old, so I'm not going to have the ability that a 18-year-old would have.
Right. And that's true for any kind of skill development.
Am I too late to do BMAT?
So BMAT is universal. It's like gravity. It applies for anything. So if you have the ability, obviously everyone's abilities range because of different ages, different genetics, different abilities, nature and nurture and such. But so everybody, I have a belief when we're going back to growth that everyone has the ability. Like if you take anybody regardless of their age or whatever, you put them on a wellness program and they're moving and such, they're going to make growth, right? They're going to make progress.
But let me do a counterexample, which is like the Beatles. So the Beatles were teenagers. They played music, so they wanted to be better musicians, and they were motivated by music. They loved it. They may or may not have had the ability, but they had the time to put in those so-called 10,000 hours, which many adults, after they get kids and jobs and mortgages, don't have that time.
Right. So, and that's one of the reasons why they say children are such fast learners. They think on languages or musical instruments faster. But in actuality, part of it is, besides them having a natural wonder and not being filled in terms of their teacup, not knowing what they know, is they have a lot of time. Children do compared to an adults.
Right. So now someone listening to this is thinking, well, I have a mortgage, I have kids, I got to pick them up after school, I got to do this, I got to do that. How am I going to work on my ability?
Right. Okay. So not everyone is equal in terms of their income. Not everyone's equal on their network. Not everyone's equal, with their education level and everything else like that. But what we all are equal to is we all have 24 hours in a day. And how people invest their time, people's time in terms of where they put their attention expresses their values, right? Because we can be very creative going back to, I don't believe that there's time management as much as it is managing our priorities. What's most important to us. Like for you, we were talking about love and we're talking about life and we're talking about learning, right? Our lessons and such. But I'm saying that if people aren't scheduling time to increase their abilities, then if people can't find an hour a day, then they're doing something. I feel like they need to reevaluate how they're investing their time.
So it's interesting because it's not necessarily about mastery, it's about direction. So if you put in that hour a day, the direction is going to be upwards, whether or not you become the Beatles or not.
I think practice makes progress.
Right.
And so I think that would be the goal. I think we're happiest when we see progress in our life, whether it's in our health, it's in our relationships, it's in our finances or anything. And so, but it takes time and investment of time, focus, capital. When I talk about focus, just imagine going outside and you have a magnifying glass and when you were kids, you used to burn like leaves and Some people burn ants and stuff like that. But when you see that
My
focal
baby
point,
sister at her
Right.
eye.
so when you're doing that, it becomes very bright, right? When light goes through a magnifying glass, you have this very bright focal point. And it's interesting because we use the word bright to describe people who are very intelligent and very smart, right? They're bright, but maybe they're not smarter than you. Maybe it's just they're better focused. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that's a lot of power. And so that's why going back to multitasking, I feel like it doesn't work. But I would say that people invest in their abilities. And the last thing is the T in the BMAT, according to BJ Fogg, is trigger. That in order to enforce a habit, you need an external trigger to remind you to do it. And that's how memory really works, right? The idea here, like for example, common time management protocol is this called the Pomodoro Technique, which is basically saying they did studies with people and found out their focus takes a dive after 25 to 30 minutes. That pretty much you could watch an episode of your favorite TV show and then it's pretty much your focus is not there. And so the Pomodoro Technique is basically taking your smartphone and sending an alarm for 30 to 45 minutes, and when the alarm goes off, you get up and you take 5 minutes and you just you move around, you take some deep breaths, you hydrate, you refresh yourself and you come back and you're going to be more productive. And the reason why you want to do this, I'll give you a couple more reasons why you want to do it, besides the fact that you lose focus after a certain amount of time, is that in memory training, we know that cramming doesn't work. That if you cram for 8 hours a day without a break, 8 hours straight, it's not going to be anywhere near as effective as if you took a break every 45 minutes to an hour, because there's these phenomenon called primacy and recency. Primacy says you tend to remember things in the beginning of something. Recency means you tend to remember something at the end. So, for example, James, you go to a cocktail party, right? And you meet, maybe they're all new people at the party. You'll remember, primacy says you'll remember people in the beginning at the party. Recency says you'll remember the last people you met at the party, more recent, right? Prime meaning first, beginning. And that you tend to forget the people at the end and in the middle. And so there's this big dip, unless somebody stands out or they're emotional, like something that stands out in meeting them. Same thing with a list. If I gave you a list of 30 words to memorize, you probably remember the beginning words and the end words, unless there were some words in the middle that stood out. So there's this big gap and dip. So like if you study for 8 hours without a break, it's like you remember stuff in the beginning and then you remember stuff at the end, but in the middle you forget.
So you want to give yourself a lot of beginnings and middles.
Exactly. So you create these 30-minute breaks or 45-minute breaks in between, then you create a lot of more beginnings and ends, primacy and recency, so you pick up a lot more content. And so that's just in terms of studying techniques, it's one of the better things you could do.
So this is great. This BMAT, and this was under the topic of grit, basically.
Of creating new habits. So
Yeah.
I mean, everything comes down to the whole. Here's the cliche quote, right? First you create your habits, and then your habits create you, right? First you create your habits, and then
I haven't heard that cliche before, but it sounds good.
There you go. And so we did 2 dedicated episodes on how to create new habits and then how to break old habits, because it's a little bit different process, because planting a tree is a very specific process, but tearing that tree out is something that's different. And so I think it's important for people to understand their habits. But going back to the 4 Gs, you have growth mindset, you have a grit mindset. And going back to grit specifically, what I was going to mention about dropping the names, a couple years ago, there was a big boxing match, Mayweather and Pacquiao, right? And I'm not a big boxing fan, but I like the highest level of competition because I like to learn and see what excellence is and champions and stuff. And I get this phone call from Sylvester Stallone saying, Jim, do you want to watch the boxing match at my place? And I'm like, I totally want to do that.
Just time out, break. How does Sylvester Stallone say to himself, I'm going to I'm going to watch boxing on TV. Who should I watch it with? Should I call up Al Pacino or should I call up Jim Kwik? How does he think? I'm calling Jim Kwik. Screw Al.
So
he was so annoying at the last boxing match.
So I think Al, I probably was low on the list of invitations because it was kind of interesting room. So I was sitting on the couch and we're watching the match, right?
You're not answering the question.
I am. So to my left on the couch was Stallone, and to his left was, it was Stallone, and to his left was Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? So the last people did get invites. I was probably the last person on this list. And if you took a picture of that couch, people would be like, who photoshopped that Asian dude in that photo?
Well, how did he think to call you at all for a boxing match that he's with Arnold Schwarzenegger and I don't know, Boris Becker and whoever. Let's also call Jim Kwik.
Boris Becker.
It's the only tennis name I can think of.
Right. So we had just had dinner that week, and we were talking about this match. So it was topical. But and people actually see on Instagram. There's a picture of there's an interesting photo of me and Sly. But going back to my lesson and going on grit. Afterwards, seeing the match, right, I went to the two of them. I was like, these two champions battling it out. It's amazing. $300 million. I mean, the highest level of competition. What does it take to be a champion? And I'll always remember what Arnold said because he said, Jim, this is the key. He's like, the difference between an amateur and a champion is the champion is willing to push past the pain period. And that for me is like a great definition of grit, right? Because in order to grow a muscle, it's like you don't want to do like the first 5 or 6 or whatever just warms up the muscle, does nothing for you. But it's the ones that you least want to do that you're going to get the most benefit from. And it's kind of like life, right? I mean, they say that the quality of our life comes down to our ability to have difficult conversations and do the hard stuff. You know, so then our life is easier and such. And so that was very telling for me because I've noticed the parallel between that and business and that and health. And in order to accomplish anything, you have these problems that come up. And
there's something else in that quote too, which is very interesting, which is that the pain period begins long before your ability ends because your brain, as soon as it feels a little bit of pain, is like, uh-oh, what's happening? Shut everything down while we figure this out. And so when I had a podcast with Jesse Itzler, and this is over about a year and a half ago, he wrote a book, Living with a Seal. A seal was training him. You know, I won't go into all the specifics of his thing. But one thing he said was, at the moment where you feel, I can't do this anymore, from that moment, you can do at least 40% more. And that's just the brain and body at work.
And I find the people that are evolved in certain levels, I'm not just saying in Hollywood, and whether it's technology and relationships and physical performance and fitness, like the SEALs, they have an acute awareness, self-awareness, meaning they understand what motivates them. They understand pain and pleasure. Because I'll tell you actually, when I was talking to Stallone, I was saying, hey, I have this potential gig. I was telling him, he was like, where are you speaking next? And I was saying, oh, this thing in Dubai. And, you know, I was telling him about projects. And I was like, do you think I should do that? And he was like, and this is what Stallone said. He said, Jim, will the pleasure outweigh the pain? And that was interesting because that was another like mark on pain, right? Because he was acutely sensitive to it. He's like, will the pleasure be worth the pain?
So the pain is like sort of traveling, being away with friends, away from friends, just all the annoyances, and the pleasure is whatever you decide.
Exactly. And then, I mean, coming back to discipline, and that's why I think it's so important to have routines. Like I have my morning routine and I have my evening routine for the same reason we were talking about before about not having to suffer from decision fatigue. So the first hour, I literally don't have to put any thought into, because it's so set up for me to just, you know, to light up my brain and to win all the time. But I think at the beginning, it took more discipline and willpower until it became a habit and it became unconscious. So, you know, for people listening.
Building your grit muscle.
Exactly. And putting myself in situations where you get comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's ultimately where we're going to grow the most. So growth, grit, and the last 2 G's for mindset, I would say a giving mindset. Giving meaning that it's not just about me, it's about we, because I think the whole reason to grow is because it allows you to have more to give.
And this is related to what we were talking about earlier with motivation. Like make sure it's about something a little bit more meaningful than as important as money is, by the way, because I'm not saying money's not important. It's extremely important to live in this society, but to succeed, you have to have the we in there more than the me, or just as much as the me.
Exactly. Even when it comes to giving, I feel like that everything in nature grows and gives, right? Everything in nature is green and it grows, or it's brown and it rots. And everything in nature also has to give back to the rest of the ecology. And if it's not, then it gets eliminated, right? And I just feel like that we don't give to get, we give because it's who we are. And I feel like...
Actually, let me understand that. Like, does a leaf give... I'm an idiot, right? So does a leaf give to ecology?
It does. Oxygen through photosynthesis.
Okay. So does a cockroach give to ecology?
I'm sure like if we lost all the bees or something in society like that, everything, there's a consequence because it's all systems. Everything, there's this whole butterfly effect. literally, I'm using butterflies to explain the butterfly effect. But the whole butterfly effect is this idea where a butterfly flapping its wings in Los Angeles could create a tsunami, across the country because everything is dynamic systems. But my point in bringing this up in giving is because we'll do more sometimes for other people than we will for ourselves. And I just feel like as long as we're growing, we're filling up our teacup so we have more to be able to give to somebody else. The other reason why I bring this up is from an accelerated learning standpoint. I think it's very important for people to listen to these shows, to listen to your show when they do, and then think about somebody that they want to pass this knowledge on to, like teach it and coach, mentor somebody in this area. Because if somebody wants to learn something faster, learn it with the intention of teaching it to somebody else. And that will double your effectiveness. Because when you learn to teach, you're paying attention differently, you're taking notes differently, you're making it your own. And here's the tweetable. This is mine. When
learn to teach is tweetable.
Yeah. I mean, here's an even better one. When I teach something, I get to learn it twice. When I teach something, I get to learn it twice. At Jim Kwik, KWIK, on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook.
No, I'm going to take credit for it myself.
But here's the thing. But that's the intention, though. Like we learn, we grew up, James, hearing this phrase that said, "Those who can't do, teach." Right? If you can't do business, you teach business in business school. But when I learned this stuff, I was very ignorant. I actually didn't think it was a negative. I was like, wow, if I can't do something, let me teach it. And then if I teach it, I could do it. And that was that's my thought process. But I would learn with the intention of teaching.
Well, the teaching is still doing.
Right. So. And so going back to giving, I feel like that everyone here would be able to learn even faster rate if you learn with the purpose of giving. That's why I launched the podcast a few months ago, is because I was thinking like, oh, how can I democratize this information in really 10, 15-minute, brain hacks and make it free for everybody, right? And that was our way of just giving back to our community. And then finally, the fourth G, I would say, in like this kind of superhero mindset is first, you're growing, you have grit mindset, you're giving, and then gratitude, right? And that's kind of the elusive obvious. But I feel like that you can only really build on success. And so, but I feel like we could only have the things that we're most appreciative for. And if anyone
But I feel like there's like a lazy way to do gratitude and a more difficult way. And like it's easy for someone to kind of look out at the sunset and say, "Oh, I'm so happy to be here." Right. Like what's real gratitude? What's hard gratitude?
Yeah, I mean, I would say active gratitude, just like active giving, because anyone could just have the spirit of giving and not do it. I think the actual act of it. So, for example, a lot of people have a vision board, right? Vision board is that thing, that little collage that you make on poster board where you cut out, pictures out of magazines of things you want to be, do, have, share, places you want to live, and vacation, and your car, all that stuff. Vision board, right? And you could take the invisible, make it visible. For me, I literally have a gratitude board. And a gratitude board is all the things that I've already have in my life that I'm just really grateful for, all on one board that I could look at and I could feel it. And that's more active because it took time to put that together. And as I achieve things that are on my goal list or my bucket list, I can put those things on my gratitude board. And if anyone wants to feel instantly more wealthy, it's literally, I would just make a list and count all the things you have that money can't buy. I mean, if you're listening to the show right now and you have the capacity to hear and to process, your ability to talk, your ability to see, your senses. I mean, gratitude at the most, if you have your health in any kind of way. Like even when I was very sick with my sleeping challenge, they have this phrase that says, a healthy person has 1,000 dreams, but an unhealthy person has only one dream. That's why I think self-care, I just put that on Twitter. It's like self-love and self-care is not selfish. I just feel like self-care is so important nowadays because we're under an immense amount of stress. And a lot of us, in what ways are people really nurturing themselves and taking, getting the right sleep, getting the right food? Because it's, and that helps to build grit, right? It helps to build resilience by, investing in our own physical and emotional health.
It's really true. And this is, there's a line from the Yoga Sutras written in 350 BC that it's one line, and it's the 9 reasons why somebody might have difficulty getting enlightenment. So whether or not you believe enlightenment, that's what was believed in 350 BC. But the first thing that on this list is sickness. Like, so you have to basically focus on, people don't think, what's health related to, spirituality or religion or mental health or whatever. you have to be physically healthy to have the energy to do all these other great things in life. You only have one life, and it's fueled only by your energy, the energy of your body.
Yeah. And I noticed that when it comes to gratitude, in terms of that vibration, it's helped me through a lot of so active gratitude is, so how I get over my stage fright is doing that process. Before I go on stage, I'll actually focus on a handful of people and reassociate myself to thinking like success stories, people that I've helped, and just like that, because when I put my focus on them, then I can't be focused on myself being scared.
I see. So let's say you're about to go out and speak in front of 1,000 people, and you're thinking, oh my God, I might not do well. They might not respond to what I'm saying. Or what do you think of maybe the woman who read the 30 books? You think of those first
students? And those are the things. And I literally changed, and I also just put this on Instagram yesterday, was that one of the greatest.
Are you digital shaming me?
This is one of the great like brain gratitude hacks there were. Like for me is just, I changed my I got to I get to. So instead of saying I got to give this presentation, I got to work out, I got to pick up the kids, I got to read this book or whatever, I just changed it to I get to, right? I get to pick up the kids, I get to speak on stage, I get to work out, and it changes. It's like so subtle. It's changing the O in got to the E in get. And it just changes the meaning, and it changes the feelings I have. If we talked about before that people aren't logical, they're biological and they're emotional, it changes, and all learning is state dependent. And that's one of the reasons why we don't learn a lot. We have to, that inherent motivation of those feelings. That I think that success, I call it H cube, goes from your head to your heart to your hands. That you could affirm things in your head, you could visualize things in your head, you could set goals in your head, but if you're not acting with your hands, nothing changes, right? But usually what's missing is that second H, which is your heart. The emotion, right?
I think that's really true. I think, again, what I've noticed, you asked me earlier, what changed after I started giving things away? And really this process started much earlier than that. That was sort of the end of the process. But what really changed for me was that I started feeling a lot more things in my heart on my daily activities and decisions. Much like you would say, Tony Hsieh, because he's only wearing the same shirt, he can focus more on the things that affect his heart, as opposed to like what shirt he should wear doesn't really affect for him his heart.
Right, and people could declutter all that, and it gives you more in terms of what's most essential.
So we've covered a lot, and I kind of want to piece it together. There's the 6 hats, the 4 Gs, BMAT. There's all these things. I do think everything kind of stems from what I'm now going to call the 3 L's, love, life, and lessons. And basically, you're only given one life, and this is what you should do with it, is growth, grit, giving, gratitude. Here's how you get grit. Here's how you get gratitude. Here's how you build the growth mindset. Right. All of these things are kind of connected all to this love, life, and lessons. Your heart, how can you improve your life? And the lessons that you can either learn or, as you say, teach, because you'll learn twice as you teach.
Very much so. I think if we're parting on I like frameworks, right? Because once people have those distinctions, they could start kind of carving out the world or their model of the world into it and start filtering by it, saying like how much, even when I talked about in the prior episode about the 10 keys for unlocking your superhero brain, it allows you to see the areas that you're neglecting by putting a name to it. And I think that's important. But ultimately...
Absolutely, which is why again, I wasn't critical of the cliches. I think actually, if all you did out of this episode was to take any one of these cliches and just think about it for a couple of hours, it would be immensely valuable. Because I've used the I got to change it to I get to. I've used that, and it's incredibly valuable.
Yeah, and it's so simple. And that's the thing, going back to dabblers. Like, people could listen to something, and what I would love for people is to hear something, because we know that common sense is not always common practice, that the little things can make the biggest difference. But I would encourage everyone who's listening to this is to take 1 or 2 ideas, out of this conversation, just employ it. Because knowledge is not power. Knowledge is only potential power. It only becomes useful when we're actually applying and taking action on it.
So let me ask you this. You deal with so many peak performers, like you've mentioned a couple of, celebrity clients or friends or whatever. What do you, they already have gone through all of this. That's why that's why everybody in the country knows their name.
Right.
So everybody knows who Jim Carrey is, for instance. By the time you've met him, by the time you've mentioned him, what do you see in someone like that? Or like you mentioned the story about Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone. But what do you see is that kind of final leg of peak performance that keeps them at a high level? Is it a persona that they keep feeding, or what is it?
Okay, so I like to reverse engineer this a lot, because I get a lot of feedback. And so for example, with Jim Carrey, I was coaching him. He had called me up and said, Jim, I'm going to be in Dumb and Dumber. I want to get smart. I want to get super smart before Dumb and Dumber. And we're in his kitchen and we're making guacamole. And it was me and him, and it was Eckhart Tolle, which is a really
Are you kidding me?
An interesting mix.
What the hell is Eckhart Tolle doing in there?
Because Jim Carrey is very interested in a lot of this transformation work. And so it just happens to be there. And I'm talking to him.
And so you called up Eckhart Tolle, who lived in Vancouver, and Eckhart Tolle flew down.
I didn't call up Eckhart Tolle.
No, he did. He called Eckhart Tolle and Jim Kwik. This is, when's Dumb and Dumber? 1994? He called, or no, it must have been a little later.
This was the second Dumb and Dumber.
Okay,
Yeah.
so he calls up Eckhart Tolle, who's sold 7 million copies of The Power of Now, and Jim Kwik, and you guys are both in this kitchen.
And we're making guacamole.
Is Eckhart Tolle a great guy?
He's a good guy. Power of Now. So just
excellent book. I love the book.
Right. And so, I talk a lot about presence, and we had a great conversation about presence and how to remember names. And I think the art of memory actually is the art of presence and the art of attention. And that's what a lot of, my training is based on. Anyway, but in terms of my takeaway, you're asking like, how do these people get to this level, and what are the, what do they value, and what's the difference? And I would say for him, his motivation, I wanted to know what his motivation was, Jim Carrey specifically. Like, why is he acting like a fool in all his movies and doing that? Like, and doesn't he concern how people look at him and everything? And he said, Jim, it's the exact opposite. He's like, I could be, an Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, and I can act like a complete spaz because I feel like that if I could act like that or in living color and I could be totally extreme, unconsciously I'm giving other people who are watching, the audience that's watching, giving them the permission to just be themselves. And he said his driving force, he thinks the biggest challenge that we all have as a community is in this world is that we have to, we're so concerned about the feelings and how people perceive us, our peers and everything. And we tend to fall to the level of other people's expectations, of us. And he says, my goal, my mission has always been to help, this is exact words, free people from concern. That's his religion. He wants to free people from concern. And he does it through his art of stand-up and television and, movies and stuff like that, where he could play an extreme character and act completely crazy or dumb and dumber or a liar or whatever it happens to be in the movie. And by doing so, he gives people permission just to be themselves.
So it's interesting because sometimes it's scripted where he's playing an actor, he's playing a role where it gives that permission. And sometimes it's his own act where he's writing and being a comedian where he has to figure out what those concerns are so he can play the role of someone who is maybe blindly unconcerned and still surviving. And so the audience can see and laugh. Right. The laugh is sort of the release of that tension of concern.
It's interesting, very, very much so. And I'd be interested just, as I don't know if what I'd be doing. This is the only thing that I've, been doing my whole kind of career, but it's interesting to see actors play these different roles. Like when I was on set with Will Smith, he was filming from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., every night. And I was like, how do you do that? Like, how do you just like in the entertainment industry, it's always hurry up to wait. That's the catchphrase. It's like you have to hurry up to get on set and you just have to sit there and wait all the time. I was like, how do you just wait there until 3 o'clock in the morning until they call you when it's your turn? And how do you get prepared and how do you, get ready? And he was like, Jim, this is exact words. He's like, Jim, I don't have to get ready. I stay ready. And I'm like, oh shoot, that's really badass.
So break that down. What does that mean?
So for him, like for me, you could wake me up at 4 o'clock in the morning and just ask me about my morning routine, my sleep, because I live what I teach, right? Because there's a level of congruency, and I find that it's really the people that have prepared the most. Because I feel like a lot of success is preparation. Like you have guests on, but you study their work. You were online watching my other interviews and reading the books and all that. That homework makes a big difference. And it shows up. And I feel like...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I feel like for him, he's so determined, right? He has this thing where I was like, how do you keep yourself active? He was like, what? And he's like, Jim, is like physically and mentally active. He's like, every day I run and I read. I'm like, that's interesting. Like it makes metaphorically, it's not just running, it's just something physical, something mental every single day to keep myself in shape. That's why I think it's a difference because, people attribute me to helping boost their mental intelligence, to be able to have facts, figures, formula, all that stuff at their mental fingertips. But I think more important than what I do than help people become mentally intelligent is become mentally fit. Like I've had students that I've seen that...
And that's the stay ready part.
That's the... Like this woman... she called me up at the office. She's like, I love you, I love you, I love you. I'm like, whoa. I'm like, who's this? She was like, I went through your online memory course and I was just like, let me have a quick story for you. I was like, and I found out, she told me a story where her grandmother gave her this family heirloom as a necklace. And it was given to her, not her mother, not her three sisters. It was given to her. And she was entrusted with it to protect it and for the family. And she hid it in her home. And have you ever hid something so well, you come up with a password that's so clever and it's so clever you don't even remember what it is. So she hid it and she couldn't find it. For a year goes by, 2 years go by, 3 years go by, and she thought it was stolen. It was lost forever. She got so much grief from her family, and she felt so bad holding on to all his angst. A couple weeks after going through our program, she woke up in the middle of the night, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. She ran down 2 flights of stairs. She goes behind the boiler into this little crevice cave, like it pulls out like the necklace. And I was like, well, in that program, we don't teach you how to find misplaced objects. She was like, Jim, I don't know what it is. It's just going through this. I'm starting to remember names. I'm learning this language. This is like...
So she's waking up parts of her brain.
She just, because it's the difference, like you have a personal trainer, right? And what is a personal trainer's job? It's to make you physically sharper, faster, stronger, more energized, flexible and everything. But that's what I do. I'm a personal fitness coach for your brain.
Right. It's not like you're just... it's not like the personal trainer is just making you lift 100 pounds. It's actually making you stronger for every area of your life.
Exactly. And that's how I describe, like people ask all the time, what do I do? And our mutual friend, Clay Bear, who talks about...
Who? Clay? Who?
Clay Bear.
He's in the room, so we're making fun of him.
So he has this 6-word process that I think is genius. He keynoted at one of our events, our Superhero Brain event, and his superpower was talking about clarity. And he's like, this makes so much sense. Like, you introduce yourself how many times a day, and it's just like how many of you actually have a design process for creating something that's interesting and fascinating to keep the conversation going, as opposed to just kind of going off and spending a minute and using buzzwords and everything. And so for me, my 6-word intro is just something simple. It's like, I build better brains. I build better, brighter brains. And it's just like, oh, well, what's that? And then they start talking about, and it's a nice intro. And so for me, that's what I feel like I am. I just like people want to be physically sharper, faster, energized, flexible. That's what I do for your brains. I make your brains sharper, faster, more fit, stronger, more powerful, more energized, clear the brain fog, have clarity, flexibility, agility, and that's my passion. Going back to whether it's the Will Smiths or Jim Carreys or whatever, I'll tell you the highest performers, whether it's Branson or anybody, they have a superpower of self-awareness. And I would end with this, that if we are to abstract and go at a meta level, that I find that the most successful people and the most fulfilled people, it's funny, James, because I'm just talking to you, I'm just kind of processing it. I feel like they have 2 things. That it takes, you want to know who you are and you want to be who you are. And this maybe wraps up our whole conversation here, where you need to have the curiosity to know yourself, really be fascinated with yourself, like know yourself, and then have the courage to really be yourself.
And I feel like, gosh, Jim, I kind of want to do another 2-hour podcast just about those 2 things, because I feel like it took me a really long time, and it's a process. So I can't say I know who I am. It's a process. It's practice makes progress as opposed to practice makes perfect. Knowing who you are is really hard.
It is.
And then being who you are is harder.
It is.
Because it's scary. You can't, nobody really is who they are, because in every setting, you put on a slightly different persona, but you're trying to make each persona as close as possible to who you really are.
And I notice also it takes up energy too, right? Like we have this energy body of like who we want to project in the world. And this kind of brings everything we've talked about in this conversation together. When we're talking about Facebook depression, everyone puts a highlight reel, a trailer of what's amazing. And we have all that. We put a lot of energy in terms of how we want to be perceived. And I feel like we put energy into a place where it's our insecurities. So we have this ideal self that we put energy in and how we want the world to see us. And we have this another energy body of our insecurities and our fears and what we're scared of, like who we are afraid of being. or people seeing, and then there's our real self. And I feel like if people feel depleted and they feel like they don't have the energy anymore, they're exhausted, it's maybe just trying to carry around those bodies and using, because it takes a charge and energy. But knowing yourself is kind of like what you were talking about. It's like our truth. It's like when we were kids, like who determined who we are? Like even when people set goals, I think a lot of people set goals for things they don't really want, because it's goals that are set unconsciously by their parents or their family or the Joneses or their colleague. You know what I mean? They're pursuing things that's not their truth.
But that's true. And at the same time, and this is what I always tell people, list the things you really enjoyed from the ages of 6 to 14, because often those things will age in their own way with you. So for instance, you might have loved comic books between the ages of 6 to 14, among many other things. Like you love tennis, you love comic books, you love other things, but that's on your list. And so now, when you are older, it's like your whole story almost could be described in terms of like a comic book analogy, and you work with, on those types of, with those types of actors and movies and so on. So it's really that, it's not like you're a superhero. It's like, but your interests and passions and loves now as a much older person are just an evolution of what you loved as a 6-year-old.
I love that.
So it's very interesting. So before I ask the last question, which it might even be a meaningless question for most people, but before I ask the last question, I just want to mention there's going to be a great excuse to have you on the podcast again, because I know you mentioned earlier you're writing an as yet untitled book. So when do you think that book will finally come out?
Next year.
Next year. So we're looking towards next year having you back on. And how can people find you right now? Because I wanna everybody to find you.
Well, I would welcome everyone to listen to my new podcast. I want to learn everything that you're doing, because you're one of the most admired people in the space. And so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
It's called Kwik Brain, KWIK Brain. People can go to kwikbrain.com. Or find it on Stitcher or iTunes or whatever. Every podcast is only 10 or 15 minutes long. It's basically brain hacks for busy people who want to learn faster and achieve more. So there's an episode on how to read a book a week without speed reading. There's a book episode on how to remember everyone's name. There's an episode on learning languages. There's an episode on my top 10 favorite brain foods. An episode on how to change your habits and how to break old habits. And it's a fun show. It's just me riffing on one thing that's going to make a measurable difference in people's lives. So that's the podcast.
I am definitely going to start listening to it.
And then social media. No social media shaming, but I'm just very active on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, and it's all at Jim Kwik, KWK. And I would love, actually, if people could share their big ahas and tag James and myself on social media. I'd love to know like your big aha from this conversation, if there was something that was there that just stood out for you. And I would also love, I'm traveling a lot. I would love any good book recommendations. So if anyone who's listening to this wants to share like your favorite reads right now, I'm very curious. That's actually how I bonded with Elon Musk. I never talk about this, but we bonded over sci-fi books. And I'm a big advocate. I never used to read fiction books for a long time, because I didn't even have time to read, the nonfiction books I had to for school and personal growth. But I find that I was reading a lot the past few years on the power of reading fiction. It builds your imagination.
Fiction's great, and I'll tell you why from my perspective. And I'd love to hear Elon Musk's favorite science fiction books. Fiction's great because it's written by the best writers. So nonfiction, almost by definition, is not written by the best writers. It's written by the best of what they're writing about. So Andre Agassi is not going to be the best writer about tennis. He's the best tennis player writing. So there's a big difference. The fiction is actually by people who've mastered the craft of writing.
Yeah, that's very true. His biography, by the way, is amazing.
Yeah.
And so I would say that for me, fiction reading is enjoyable. It improves your imagination, but it's been shown to increase emotional intelligence, especially in the area of empathy. And when you're reading books with stories and characters, it gives you a level of empathy, that higher degree of emotional intelligence.
What was Elon Musk's favorite science fiction book?
We weren't talking about necessarily favorite. Well, except we were talking. We were bonding over at the time. Going deep in a book called Ender's Game.
Oh yeah, Ender's Game is great.
And at the time,
Orson Scott Card.
Yeah, and they were talking about, this is before the film came
much
out,
better than the movie.
Like right, exactly. So I would encourage people to. But going back to the social media, I would love to get some really good book recommendations, and if you could tag both of us in there, that would be amazing.
And finally, I don't know how much people care about this, but give me one Eckhart Tolle story, because I just think he's such an interesting character.
Okay, this is a little bit skewed because we really spend most of the time. He didn't really talk a whole lot when we were together.
He doesn't seem like a talker.
No, but ironically, listen to Eckhart. Does you listen to like Audible?
I've listened to his some of his seminars that he's
I listen to books on I was gonna say cassette. This is kind of dating myself. Books, audiobooks, and people ask all the time. I prefer reading when I can because I feel like that's more active. But I do listen to audiobooks and obviously podcasts. I do happen to listen to them at 1.5 or 2x or something like that because I think we can all learn at that speed and train ourselves to do that just like we do with reading. Eckhart Tolle, interesting enough, going over the sleep issues and stuff. I can't listen to, there's like sleep learning is a myth. You can't listen to an audio while you're sleeping and expect to learn anything brand new. It's been debunked. If you are learning anything, it's only because those are the times when you're awake and you're picking up, bits and pieces and everything. Now you can do it through dream. And I did a whole episode on how to remember your dreams. Like I have this whole how to start my day. And the first thing I do when I wake up is remember my dreams. And because this is interesting. I don't know if you know this, James, but a lot of incredible works of art, literature, movies, science actually came through dream recollection.
Sure. I forget there's a classic Keith Richards story where like one of the most famous Rolling Stones songs, and I forget which one it is.
Yeah.
The lyric, he woke up, wrote down the first few words, went back to sleep, and then woke up again and wrote the whole song.
Very much so. And that Paul McCartney did that with Yesterday. Mary Shelley came out with Frankenstein in a dream. I mean, Elias Howe, who created the sewing machine, created that in a dream. The periodic table was in a chemist's dream. It's pretty crazy. But the challenge is most people...
Batman, I'm going to kill.
Right. But it's a challenge because when most people wake up... So what happens is you're learning all day and you're trying to solve problems all day as an entrepreneur or as a student or whatever. But when you dream, your subconscious doesn't stop. It actually keeps on working on it. So often in those times, you come up with these revelations and these insights. But what often happens when you wake up the next morning, you forget, right? So I did this 6 ways on how to remember your dreams episode. And that's the first thing I do when I wake up. And the second thing is make my bed. But everything is for my brain, right? Anyway, with Eckhart, I didn't have a lot of interaction with him because he was there for a little bit and he didn't talk a whole lot. But I actually, for me, to help me sleep, it's the only audiobook I could listen to is Eckhart. His the way he talks, it just puts me to sleep.
Yeah, and he has like huge silences because he kind of wants people to think while he's talking, but his voice is so boring. His humor is so like droll. Like he's only like mildly funny. Like he's not very funny,
right.
But he laughs at his own jokes very quietly. And then there's silence. And but anyway, okay. Well, Jim Kwik, kwikbrain.com, your podcast, your book that's going to come out next year, and we'll definitely have you on the podcast again because at the very least, we could do it entirely about how to know who you are and how to be who you are. But this has been so interesting. I really have to spend a lot of time thinking about this. I think that there's a lot to unpack in this, and I really appreciate you doing this podcast. We've met a couple times. We did that first podcast over Skype. First time we're doing a podcast in person. I hope it's the first of many.
James,
so thanks, Jim.
Thank you, and I appreciate everyone who's listening, and I appreciate all the capes that you wear.
I just want to say thank you to everyone listening to this. Please take a moment to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or wherever it is you get your podcasts. It will only take a second, but it will help other people discover the podcast, and it will really show people in general that this is a quality show and that it's worth listening to. You can also check out the show notes at jamesaltucher.com/podcast. Also, if you want to get my blog updates and other updates that I do, sign up for the newsletter at jamesaltucher.com. Thanks again. I really appreciate you guys.
Hey, thanks for listening to the James Altucher Show on YouTube today. I have more great episodes for you every week. Please don't forget to click my face right now and subscribe to the show. More episodes are here. More episodes are coming. Thanks so much for watching.